The night is loaded with a disturbing silence, as if the universe contained breath. In some corner of the human mind, an winged figure appears, illuminated by an ethereal light that does not seem of this world. At another extreme, a dark, seductive whisper sneaks into the cracks of our deepest emotions. Angels and demons, two sides of the same currency, opposite forces that have shaped our perception of good and evil since time immemorial. They are not just myths. They are shadows and lights that have accompanied humanity since their first thought about the sacred and the forbidden. The figure of the angel, always wrapped in an aura of purity and protection, inspires hope. Meanwhile, the demon, with his crooked smile and his deceptive promises, represents the wishes we fear accepting. These beings have transcended the pages of ancient sacred texts to infiltrate literature, art, music, and even our dreams. Why, then, we are fascinated so much? Perhaps because, in them, we see our own fears, aspirations, and contradictions reflected. In ancient times, the angels did not have the benign appearance we imagine today. They were messengers of divine power, entities that could unleash the anger of heaven or bring news that would change the fate of men. His faces were not always beautiful or humans. Some traditions describe them as burning wheels full of eyes, or figures with multiple wings that can barely be understood by human understanding. These images caused astonishment and fear, a mixture that still beats in the deepest of our souls. On the other hand, demons were not simple figures of absolute evil. Before being relegated to the underworld, many of them were gods of ancient cultures that, with the passage of time and the imposition of new beliefs, were transformed into enemies of the new divine order. Baal, Astaroth, Lilith. Names that were once revered with respect are now pronounced with contempt or fear. But who decides what is celestial and what is infernal? Is the demon an unjustly punished rebel or a representation of what we fear within ourselves? The answer, perhaps, is in the whisper between the lines of the stories we have told for centuries. Western culture is impregnated with these figures. From the cathedrals that show victorious angels crushing demons, to the dark verses of poets that describe the torment of hell, there is no corner of our history that is not touched by these narratives. Faith, art, and literature have used their wings and horns to talk about the divine and the human, the pure and the corrupt, the eternal and the ephemeral. But the true strength of these figures does not only reside in the sacred texts or in the masterpieces of the great artists. His power is in collective imagination, how we have made them living metaphors for our internal struggles. When we look at the sky and look for hope, we think of angels. When we fall into temptation or face our shadows, we feel the presence of demons. They are our creations and, at the same time, our owners. In each era, angels and demons have changed face to adapt to the anxieties and hopes of those who look at them. During the Middle Ages, the angels were severe guardians and the demon symbols of the invisible dangers that stalked souls. In the Renaissance, art made them more human, closer, but also more disturbing. And today, in a world where science and faith live together in a fragile balance, our stories, our films, our nightmares continue to inhabit. There is something deeply human in the need to believe in these forces. Not because they are only representations of good and evil, but because they tell us about the eternal dilemmas of humanity. Are we able to choose the right thing when nobody looks at us? Is evil a tempting path, but empty? Can we be redeemed, even when we fall into the darkest of our own decisions? The answers are not simple. Maybe they are never. But while we look for them, while listening to those echoes of wings beating in the distance or feeling a strange, almost burning heat, close to us, we know that we are not alone. Angels and demons walk among us, not as invisible beings, but as part of who we are, what we fight to be. And in that struggle, between the celestial and the infernal, we are face to face with our own humanity, imperfect and eternal. The creation of light and shadow does not happen in a single moment, or in one place. It is an ancient whisper that runs through the rivers of the Tigris and the Euphrates, filters between the sands of Egypt and burns as a sacred fire in Perse's temples too. Before the Judeo Christian texts speak of good and evil, these forces already danced in the oldest mythologies, shaping the human understanding of existence. Its roots are not anchored only in faith, but also on earth, in the daily struggle to understand the world and find a purpose. In the lands of Mesopotamia, good and evil were not abstract concepts, they were faced gods. Marduk, the warrior god of Babylon, stood against Tiamat, the primary chaos, in a fight that defined the fate of the cosmos. Creation, according to this tradition, was not a peaceful act, but a battle in which the order triumphed over chaos. But this triumph was never definitive. Mesopotamian myths show us a fragile world, where balance could be broken at any time, and where the forces of disorder waited for their opportunity to return. This ancestral fear, that constant tension between the ordered and the uncontrollable, was leaked in the biblical narratives, where Genesis speaks of a disorderly and empty earth before God organized it. In Egypt, good and evil took another form. Osiris, the god of life and regeneration, faced Set, the desert god, violence and betrayal. But there was no absolute division here. Set, although destroyer, was also necessary to maintain the balance of the universe. Without conflict, there could be no renewal; without death, there could be no life. This idea of duality, that both forces are necessary for the cycle of existence, left an indelible mark on subsequent beliefs. In Judeo Christian stories, although Satan is the adversary, its existence is essential for the drama of free will make sense. Without the possibility of choosing evil, good would lose its meaning. But it was in Persia where good and evil became absolute concepts. Zoroastrismo, with his teachings about Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu, shapes a theology that deeply influenced Abrahamic religions. Ahura Mazda, the god of light and truth, was the benevolent creator, while Angra Mainyu represented the darkness, deception, and destruction. In this system, humanity became a battlefield between these two cosmic forces. Each human action had a moral weight, an impact on the eternal struggle between light and darkness. This Persian dualism became a lens through which the stories of the Old Testament were reinterpreted. Satan, who in the first Hebrew texts was an accuser more than an absolute enemy, began to acquire features of Angra Mainyu, transforming into God's archi-enemigo. The fight was not only for the earth or for the fate of a nation, it was for the soul of humanity. From this tension arises a narrative that resonates throughout the Judeo-Christian canon: good and evil are not only individual moral elections, but cosmic forces at war, whose outcome will define the destiny of the universe. However, these ideas did not come without conflict. In the oldest traditions of Israel, Yahweh was a total God, sovereign of everything, both of good and evil. The prophet Isaiah makes it clear, "I form the light and I believe the darkness, I do peace and believe adversity," Isaiah 45 verse 7. But the influence of Zoroastrian dualism sowed the idea that evil could not be a creation of God, but something that existed separately, something that should be defeated. This theological evolution not only redefined Satan, but also the purpose of man: not only obey God, but to ally with him in his fight against darkness. The stories of these ancient cultures not only influenced Judeo-Christian theology, they also transformed their narrative. The patriarchs and prophets began to be seen not only as leaders or spiritual guides, but as warriors in this cosmic battle. Abraham facing the idolatry of his time, Moses challenging the gods of Egypt, David defeating Goliath, Jesus resisting temptation in the desert, they all become symbols of this eternal struggle between good and evil. But despite the apparent clarity of this battle, the lines are never so simple. The Judeo-Christian stories, such as the mythologies that preceded them, are full of characters that challenge the categories. Judas, the traitor, is also the one who allows the divine purpose to be fulfilled. Pharaoh hardens his heart against Moses, but just because God has decided so. Even Satan, with all his evil, is a tool in God's great plan. The influence of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Persia not only contributed a conflict narrative, but also a recognition of the complexity of the human condition. And it is here, in this tension between the simple and the complex, the absolute and the relative, where the stories of angels and demons find their true power. There, angels, demons, and invisible forces are not only witnesses, but fundamental actors in the drama of life. In Genesis, God creates a perfect world, but it is a world where the supernatural is already present. The first chapters not only speak of a full garden of life, but of a snake that whispers dangerous promises. That being, which many identify as a demon disguised, marks the beginning of a tumultuous relationship between humans and the invisible forces that surround them. Genesis is not just a creation story, it is a warning that the sacred and the evil are closer than it seems, always observing from the shadows. Talmud, on the other hand, is a vast ocean of words that explore the mysteries of life and divine. Here, the angels are not just messengers. They are protectors, mediators, and sometimes, figures that challenge human understanding. Talmud speaks of Metatron, an angel with such a high status that some confuse him with a manifestation of God himself. But it also tells us about Lilith, a dark figure that represents the wild, not domesticated, which escapes the control of man. These stories, disseminated between legal and ethical discussions, remind us that the struggle between good and evil does not happen only in heaven or hell, but in everyday elections. The apocryphal texts, those writings that were out of the official fee, offer us a window to a broader and more disturbing world. In the Book of Enoch, the guards, a group of fallen angels, descend to the earth to teach the secret men who have never had to know. These teachings, although powerful, bring chaos and destruction, altering the balance of the world. These angels, who were once part of the heavenly hosts, become a living warning of what happens when divine power is corrupted by ambition. Another apocryphal text, the Gospel of Judas, presents an even more disconcerting perspective. Here, Judas is not only the traitor who gives Jesus, but a character who acts under the instructions of Jesus himself, fulfilling a purpose that no one more understands. This story not only humanizes Judas, but also raises questions about the nature of good and evil, about whether darker acts can have a hidden divine purpose. And then there are the pseudepigraphos, texts falsely attributed to venerated figures, but that contain ideas and narratives that have infiltrated religious culture throughout the centuries. In these writings, we find descriptions of angels and demons that are not found in the canonical Bible. Solomon's Will, for example, shows us a king who uses a magical ring to control demons and build the temple of God. Here, demons are not just malignant beings, they are creatures with stories, motivations, and personalities that make them both fascinating and terrifying. In the center of all these texts, there is a constant: the supernatural world is not separated from human existence. The angels not only bring messages, they intervene in battles, protect the righteous, and sometimes punish the evils. Demons are not just external enemies, they are reflexes of internal struggles, of the desires that we do not want to recognize. Each page, each story, is a reminder that the divine and the evil are not in a distant place, but in every whisper of the wind, in each shadow that passes, in every decision we make. Sacred texts are not mere stories. They are mirrors. When looking at them, we not only see the visions of the ancients, but our own fears, hopes, and questions. In them, the supernatural ceases to be an abstract concept and becomes a tangible presence, a force that accompanies us in each step, invisible but unavoidable. And when we go from page on page, the feeling that someone, or something, observes us becomes impossible to ignore. The word angel has a soft, almost ethereal echo, as if pronouncing it, something beyond the human was invoked. Its origin, from the Greek angelos and the Hebrew malach, means messenger. But calling them only messengers is to reduce them to something too simple. In the vast narrative of sacred texts, Los Angeles are something much more complex. They are fire, wind, strength, and mystery. They are the extended fingers of the divine, touching the human world with purpose and power. In the Old Testament, angels are imposing figures, often terrible in their majesty. They do not present themselves as the benevolent beings that modern imagination has created. In Genesis, 3 men appear in front of Abraham, announcing the birth of Isaac and the imminent destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. They are figures that, although they seem human, carry a divine authority that does not allow doubts. In Exodus, an angel guides the Israelites for the desert, an invisible but protective presence. But even in their protection, there is a warning: these angels are not indulgent. His loyalty is towards God, not towards men. And then there is the terrifying story of Isaiah. In a vision, the prophet sees the seraphim, angels with 6 wings, 2 to cover the face, 2 to cover their feet, and 2 to fly. His song of Holy, Holy, Holy is the Lord of the armies fills the temple, and his presence makes the foundations tremble. These are not messengers who get closer, they are beings that embody the unattainable glory of God, incomprehensible forces that inspire both astonishment and fear. In contrast, the New Testament angels show a closer, almost familiar face. They appear frequently at key moments, as if their main purpose was to announce the arrival of a new time. Gabriel, one of the few angels mentioned by his name, visits Maria to announce that she will be the mother of the Messiah. There is no overwhelming force of the seraphim in this encounter, but a solemn calm. Even so, Mary turbs before her words, because even in her serenity, angels carry with them the essence of the divine, something that the human soul cannot completely understand. In the New Testament stories, Los Angeles not only announce, they also serve as guardians and witnesses. In the Gospels, an angel comforts Jesus in the garden, a silent gesture that speaks of compassion in the midst of suffering. And after the resurrection, it is they who announce women that the tomb is empty, a news that will change the course of history. Despite these differences between texts, there is something constant in the nature of angels. They are not independent entities. They never act by their own will. They are reflexes of the divine will, tools that carry the message and fulfill the purpose of God. His appearance changes according to the need of the moment. They can be human figures that are confused with mortals, such as men who visit Abraham. They can be glorious manifestations that leave the prostrated observer, like the angels that surround the throne of God in prophetic visions. Or they can simply be voices, an invisible presence that whispers in man's ear. The roles they play are as varied as the narrative itself. They are protectors, like the angel that prevents Balaam from cursing Israel. They are executors of the divine judgment, like the angels that unleash pests in the Apocalypse. And they are mediators, carrying the prayers of men to the throne of God. But perhaps its most disconcerting function is to fight. In Daniel's book, an angel explains that he took to arrive because he was held by the prince of Persia, a figure that seems to be a fallen angel. This invisible battle, this conflict that occurs beyond what human eyes can see, hints at a spiritual world that operates in parallel to ours. The transition from Old to New Testament also brings a change in how the relationship between angels and humans is perceived. In the oldest texts, the interaction is limited and always loaded with reverence and fear. But in the Gospels, although angels are still fearsome in their holiness, they approach men more, walking with them in times of crisis and hope. This closeness, however, does not eliminate the fundamental distance. The angels are high, while humans belong to the earth. Perhaps the most fascinating duality of angels is how they are perceived. For some, they are personal protectors, invisible guardians who walk by our side. For others, they are a distant force, almost indifferent, whose loyalty belongs only to its creator. But in both cases, its existence raises questions that transcend the words of the texts. What does it mean that divine intervenes in human life through these messengers? Why do some receive their visit and others do not? And what do these winged beings tell us about the relationship between heaven and earth? While the sacred pages continue to reveal their stories, Los Angeles remain as living symbols of what we yearn and fear. And although its wings can be invisible, its presence never stops feeling at the time when the world seems bigger than ourselves. At the top of heaven, where the light has no shadow and time does not find its rhythm, it is said that the heavenly choir resonates with eternal songs, vibrations that maintain the balance of the universe. But this choir is not uniform, it is a complex fabric of hierarchies and orders, each with its purpose, each with its place in the divine design. According to Pseudo-Dionisio Areopagita, that mystic of the 7th century that tried to draw a map of the heavenly, the angels are not only messengers, but that they inhabit a hierarchical structure of an almost mathematical precision. In his work The Heavenly Hierarchy, Pseudo-Dionisio divides Los Angeles into 3 main hierarchies, each composed of 3 choirs. These hierarchies reflect the proximity of angels to God and their function within the divine plan. On the cusp are the ones closest to divinity, beings that contemplate God directly and absorb their glory. As we descend through the hierarchies, we find angels whose task is to mediate between the divine and the human, bringing the light of the Creator to the darkest corners of creation. The first hierarchy is the most sublime, the closest to the heavenly throne. In it are the seraphim, the cherubs, and the thrones. The seraphims, whose name means the fiery, are described as living flames of pure love. Isaiah saw them in his vision, surrounding the throne of God with his 6 wings and proclaiming his holiness. His fire does not burn, but purifies. They are the reflection of divine glory in its purest state, vibrations of light and love that never go out. Just below are the cherubs, guardians of knowledge and wisdom. In Genesis, it is they who, with fire swords, protect the path to the tree of life after the fall of man. But its function is not just protecting, they also contemplate the divine truth, and its wisdom permeates the universe. The cherubs, often represented with multiple wings and faces, symbolize the complexity of the divine, a reminder that the truth is multifaceted and deep. At the base of this hierarchy are thrones, stability and justice pillars. They are the foundation of God's throne, the bearers of His glory. Although less mentioned than seraphim and cherubs, thrones represent the idea that divine is not only love and wisdom, but also order and balance. The second hierarchy acts as a bridge between the divine and the created. Here we find dominations, virtues, and powers. Domains are leaders among Los Angeles, who say that God's orders are fulfilled throughout the cosmos. They do not act for themselves, but supervise the lower angels, guaranteeing that the heavenly order is maintained. The virtues, meanwhile, are associated with the divine power that manifests itself in miracles and natural phenomena. They are the forces that move the stars and control the elements, reminding us that the natural world is not separated from the divine, but that it is an expression of its power. And the powers, guardians of the cosmic order, are responsible for maintaining the balance between the celestial and earthly forces. In them, the fight against the forces of evil becomes tangible, as if they were a protective shield that prevents chaos from crossing the borders of the universe. Finally, in the third hierarchy we find the principles, the archangels, and the angels. These are the closest to men, those who act directly in the material world. The principalities supervise the nations and kingdoms, making sure that leaders act according to the divine will. Its function is both spiritual and political, although its presence is often invisible. The archangels, such as Miguel, Gabriel, and Raphael, are the most prominent warriors and messengers. Miguel, the leader of the heavenly hosts, is the defender against evil, the bearer of the divine sword. Gabriel, El Heraldo, brings news that changes the course of history, such as the announcement to Mary. Raphael, the healer, is the guide of the losses and protector of the travelers. Their names, which end in he, remember that they are extensions of the power and presence of God. Finally, there are Los Angeles, the lowest, but no less significant range. They are the personal guardians of humanity, those who walk with us on a day-to-day basis, whispering truths that we often do not listen. In them, the heavenly and the earthly meet. It is the bearers of hope, who intercede in our smallest struggles. This hierarchical structure is not only an attempt to order the supernatural, but also a vision of how heaven interacts with earth. Each choir, each range, have a purpose that is intertwined with others, forming a heavenly fabric that sustains the universe. In this scheme, Los Angeles are not only devotion figures, but actors in a cosmic work whose script we hardly understand. And although the texts try to describe them, Los Angeles remain wrapped in mystery. They are light and shadow, strength and subtlety, voices that sing an eternal melody that only the soul can listen. In the vast and complex universe of the celestial, the archangels rise as figures of authority and power, warriors and messengers that cross the borders between the divine and the earthly. They are not just angels, they are leaders, combatants, protectors, and heralds who play specific roles in the most crucial moments in sacred history. Each has a name that resonates with the force of the divine purpose, an echo that transcends the centuries: Gabriel, Miguel, Raphael, and Uriel. Miguel, the best known and venerated of the archangels, is the great commander of the heavenly hosts. His name, which means who is God, it is not only a title, but a direct challenge to any force that dares to oppose the divine. Miguel's image with his raised sword, facing the dragon in the Apocalypse, is one of the most powerful in Christian iconography. He is the defender of justice, the protector of humanity, and the leader in the eternal battle against evil. Miguel not only fights demons, his fight is a constant reminder that good always has a defender, even in the darkest moments. In every blow of his sword, he seems to resonate a message: the light will prevail. Gabriel, whose name means God is my strength, is the messenger par excellence. His presence in sacred texts is always associated with advertisements of great importance. It was Gabriel who appeared before the Virgin Mary to announce that she would be the mother of the Savior, and her appearance was no less shocking because she was less violent than Miguel's. Gabriel does not carry a sword, but words. His weapon is communication, the bridge between heaven and earth. In your hands, the divine message is not a simple transmission of information, but a transformative act. Every time it appears, the lives change, the stories are rewritten, and the divine gets a little more to the human. Raphael, whose name means healthy God, is the protector and healer. His figure is mainly associated with the Book of Tobias, where he accompanies and guides the young Tobit on a trip full of tests and learning. Raphael not only physically protects Tobit, but also guides him towards the truth, towards love and, finally, towards the healing of his family. Raphael is the angel who reconciling, who restores what is broken, who heals visible and invisible wounds. His presence is a reminder that the divine not only punishes or rewards, but also heals, repairs and comforts. Uriel, whose name means a light of God, is less mentioned in canonical texts, but his figure has endured in apocryphal and mystical traditions. Uriel is the bearer of divine light, the angel of wisdom and lighting. In tradition, he is associated with the revelation of hidden secrets, with the guide of the lost and with the protection against spiritual darkness. Uriel is like a torch that shines in the middle of uncertainty, a lighthouse that guides navigators in turbulent seas. His role is not only of intellectual lighting, but also of inspiration and hope. Although their roles are different, archangels share a deep bond, all are extensions of power and divine will. They do not act for themselves, but incarnate specific aspects of the divine they need to manifest in specific moments. They are figures that show us different facets of the sacred, the relentless justice of Miguel, the transforming communication of Gabriel, Raphael's compassionate healing and the wise lighting of Uriel. Beyond their attributes, archangels also represent a fascinating duality. They are immensely powerful, but deeply connected to human problems and needs. Miguel fights the forces that threaten humanity. Gabriel brings messages that change the course of human history. Raphael heals the wounds of the body and spirit. Uriel guides the lost light. They are at the same time cosmic warriors and personal guardians, beings that inhabit the heavenly heights but whose actions have a direct impact on our existence. And although their names are known, the archangels are still involved in a halo of mystery. How is your fight in invisible kingdoms? What really means being a bearer of light, a divine healer, a messenger, or a heavenly warrior? His stories, although powerful, leave more questions than answers, as if the sacred could only be partially revealed, always maintaining a veil of the unknowable. But maybe there lies its strength. Archangels are not only devotion or mythology figures. They are living symbols of the connection between the human and the divine, reminders that, even in our lonely battles, we are not completely alone. Their names, their roles, their actions, are echoes of something bigger, something that invites us to look high and seek light, justice, healing, and truth in the midst of chaos and darkness. There is something deeply moving in the idea that angels can walk among us, not with great gestures or deployments of power, but in the silence of everyday life. In contrast to the archangels whose stories are epic and monumental, anonymous angels act in the shadows, taking care, guiding and, sometimes, intervening in such subtle ways that their actions can go unnoticed. But his presence, although discreet, is impregnated with meaning. They are the response to the whisper of a desperate prayer, the hand that sustains us when we fall, or the inspiration that comes at the right time. Anonymous angels are presented in stories as personal guardians, an invisible figure that accompanies the human being throughout his life. In the Judeo Christian tradition, this idea crystallizes in the concept of the guardian angel, a being assigned to each person since their birth, responsible for protecting their soul and guiding it towards good. This belief is not only rooted in sacred texts, but has also found an echo in the individual experiences of common people who claim to have felt their presence in moments of danger, confusion, or suffering. The testimonies about these meetings are as diverse as the people who tell them. A mother who loses control of the car on an icy road and, somehow inexplicable, finds the vehicle stopped next to the road, as if invisible hands had intervened. A man who, at the edge of making a devastating decision, listens to an inner voice that deters, full of a peace that cannot be attributed to his own thoughts. Or the child who falls from a tree, only to be found unharmed in circumstances that challenge all logic. These stories, although subjective, share a common element, the feeling that something bigger, something out of human understanding, manifested at the exact moment. It doesn't matter if these experiences are rationalized as coincidences or miracles, what matters is the impact they have on those who live them. The feeling that someone is taking care of them, a silent protector who never seeks recognition. Culturally, anonymous angels have left their mark on art, literature, and music. In the Renaissance, the artists filled the canvases with images of winged children, the famous putti, which although they are not strictly theological, reflect the popular idea of a tender and close angelic presence. In literature, angels appear as characters that guide the hero or heroine, often without revealing their identity until the end, as if they wanted to remind us that the divine can be present even in the most ordinary. But angels do not always need to manifest supernaturally to exert their influence. In many religious and spiritual traditions, it is taught that human beings can be instruments of angels, acting as their hands and their voice in the world. A stranger who pays someone's account in trouble, a neighbor who offers help without expecting anything in return, or even a simple smile that comes at the most gloomy moment can be seen as expressions of the divine through the human. In this sense, anonymous angels are not only celestial beings, but also a reminder that we can all be carriers of grace and goodness. In the Bible, there are examples of angels who present themselves almost imperceptibly, such as the 3 men who visit Abraham in Genesis. At first, they seem to be simple travelers, but it is soon clear that they carry a divine message. This pattern of the supernatural hidden in the mundane is repeated in Christian history and beyond, as if the sky preferred to operate through the simplest and most human gestures. Even in apocryphal texts and mystical traditions, everyday angels appear as mediators between God and humanity, not with thrones and trumpets, but with small and significant gestures. In the Talmud, there is talk of how each leaf of grass has an angel that inclines it and says, "Grow." This poetic image encapsulates the idea that there is no too small or insignificant act for divine attention, and that angels are present in all aspects of creation. The fascination with anonymous angels is not only a matter of faith, but also a human need. In a world full of chaos and uncertainty, the idea that there is something, or someone, watching out for us Consuelo offers you. It invites us to look beyond appearances and believe that even in the darkest moments, there is a light that guides the road. These angels do not need wings to fly or trumpets to announce their arrival. His presence is felt in the small daily miracles, in the peace moments that appear when we need them most, and in the hands that raise us when we fall. They are the reminder that the divine is not as far as it seems, and that sometimes, grace manifests itself in the most common and everyday. In the confines of ancient narratives, in texts that move between the sacred and the apocryphal, there is a story that mixes mystery, power, and tragedy, that of the vigilantes, known as the Grigori in the Book of Enoch. Angelical beings who, instead of fulfilling their purpose as guardians of humanity, succumb to prohibited desires and dragged with them the creation towards an abyss of corruption. Its history is not only that of a rebellion, but a reminder of how poorly used power can deform even the divine. The guards were designated angels to observe and protect the earth. According to the Enoch story, they were sent by God to monitor humans, guide them and ensure that the divine order prevailed in creation. But in this closeness with mortals, something in them changed. What began as a divine mission became an earthly desire, a fascination that became obsession. These angels, when observing human life, were attracted to the beauty of the daughters of men, an attraction that led them to violate the laws of heaven. Headed by a leader named Semiazar, the guards made a pact between them, a collective oath to carry out their transgression. It was a deliberate act, a conscious rebellion against the divine order. They descended to the earth and took human wives, joining the heavenly with the earthly in a prohibited union. From these unions the Nephilim were born, giants who were a mixture of the human and the divine, creatures of great strength but also of immense perversity. These creatures, far from bringing blessing, became a curse for humanity. The Nephilim devastated the earth, sowing chaos and destruction. According to the story, his voracious appetite did not know limits, and his presence corrupted not only humans, but to nature itself. The spilled blood cried out to heaven, and creation itself seemed to moan under the weight of this transgression. The men, who should have been guided and protected by Los Angeles, now suffered under the yoke of these aberrant creatures, while the guards observed how their actions unleashed a torrent of chaos. But the decline of the guards was not limited to their carnal desire. According to Enoch's book, they also introduced prohibited knowledge to humanity, teaching arts and skills that were not destined to be revealed. Semiazar and his companions shared metallurgy secrets, showing how to manufacture weapons of war. Azazel, another of the leaders, taught the art of cosmetics and sorcery, leading humanity to practices that corrupted their purity. Science and magic, in their essence, were not bad, but in the wrong hands and without the divine guide, they became tools of destruction and decline. God, observing the corruption of the earth and the suffering of humanity, did not remain indifferent. The heavens opened, and a trial was issued against the guards. The archangels Miguel, Gabriel, Raphael and Uriel were sent to execute the punishment. Miguel led the battle against the rebel angels, enclosing them in dark abysses, while the Nephilim were annihilated in the flood. Azazel, in particular, was pointed out as one of the most guilty, and his punishment was exemplary. Chained in the depths, covered with darkness, his destiny was to wait for the final judgment. The fall of the vigilantes had consequences that resonated far beyond their time. His transgression not only brought immediate destruction, but left a mark in the spiritual history of humanity. The Nephilim and the prohibited teachings became symbols of the temptation of power and the danger of disobeying the limits established by the divine. The history of the guards is an echo of the fragility of any being, even those closest to God, in the face of desires and corruption. But this story also raises disturbing questions. The word demon immediately evokes a feeling of darkness and terror, a figure contrary to everything that is good and divine. But what is a demon really? Throughout history, the concept has mutated and adapted to cultures, religions and beliefs, but has always been linked to the idea of the evil, the destructive and the opposite of light. In its origins, the term demon comes from the Greek daimon, which did not necessarily have an evil connotation. In ancient Greece, the daemons were considered spiritual beings, intermediaries between the gods and humans. These beings could influence human actions, but were not inherently evil. The daimon of Socrates, for example, was a spirit that guided him to the truth and separated him from evil. Thus, in its initial sense, the concept of demon was not necessarily negative, but a spiritual being that could influence human destiny and decisions. However, with the passage of time and the development of religious and philosophical thinking in the great monotheistic religions, the meaning of demon was transformed. In the Judeo Christian culture, the demon went on to represent the primary figure of evil, the opponent of the divine plan and the enemy of humanity. In Christianity, the devil is not an abstract or neutral being, but an active adversary of God and creation. In the Old Testament of the Bible, the concept of the devil was not yet as defined as it is in later texts. Evil was personified through figures like Satan, who presents himself not as much as a demon in the modern sense, but as an accuser or adversary who challenges human loyalty to God. In Job's book, Satan appears before God as a being that tests the faith of men, but it is not yet the evil and sovereign of evil that would later be consolidated in the New Testament. It is in the New Testament, with the appearance of figures such as the devil, that the devil begins to take the form we know today, a being that not only opposes God, but also seeks to drag humans towards perdition. It is said that Satan is the leader of demons, fallen angels who rebelled against God, as he recounts in the book of Isaiah and in the revelation of the Apocalypse. It is then that the figure of the devil goes from being a heavenly adversary to becoming the main enemy of the human being. The demon, now, is seen as the being that encourages sin, temptation, and corruption. Its objective is to move men from divine truth and take them along the path of destruction. It is not only a being that acts by itself, but a cunning enemy who uses seduction, deception, and control of human will to fulfill its purpose. The temptation in the Garden of Eden, with the snake as a representation of evil, is the first great victory of Satan, an act that shows his power over humanity since the beginning of the world. Over the centuries, the concept of the devil has become increasingly complex. In the Middle Ages, the figure of the devil was associated with the cult of witchcraft and dark forces. The demonic possessions, the curses, and the apparitions became common in the religious and popular stories, and the demons were perceived as beings that could invade and control the human body and mind. the idea of exorcisms was consolidated, and demons were portrayed as beings with an infinite manipulation and evil capacity. The concept of demon not only affects religion, but has penetrated popular culture, being the protagonist of myths, legends, and even novels. The modern representations of the demon have evolved, but always maintain a link with the original figure, the being that opposes good and feeds on human evil. From the classic images of demons with horns and tail, to the most subtle and psychological representations of evil in contemporary literature, demons remain a manifestation of the darkest of human nature. In the theological vision, demons are seen not only as opponents of good, but as active agents in the spiritual struggle between heaven and hell. It is believed that they have an intelligence and cunning that allows them to manipulate human desires, promote selfishness, anger, hatred, and other negative emotions that move away the human being from peace and divine light. It is said that its power manifests itself mainly through temptation, moral corruption, and spiritual confusion, always buscando attract souls towards sin and perdition. But the concept of the devil is not only theological, it is also psychological and symbolic. Through the centuries, demons have represented everything we fear and repudiate: temptation, weakness, chaos, suffering, and, finally, death. In each culture and time, demons have been a way to personify the unknown and the terrifying. They are no longer only beings with grotesque appearance, but also representations of the deepest fears of humanity, evil within each of us, the fight against our own interior demons. The demon, then, has been much more than a simple malignant figure. Throughout the times it has been the mirror of human darkness, the reflection of our internal struggles, and the constant battle between good and evil. It is the eternal enemy, but also the proof of our ability to choose between light and darkness, between truth and lie. As the story progresses, the demon figure continues to evolve, but its essence remains intact: the eternal opponent of the divine plan, the force that faces everything that is pure and fair. Satan, the name that resonates strongly in the Judeo Christian traditions, is much more than a malignant figure. It is the archetype of evil, the eternal adversary, the being that faces the divine goodness and the divine purpose. But its evolution in religious tradition has been complex, transforming over time from a relatively neutral figure to become the absolute leader of evil, the devil who inspires sin and chaos in the world. In his first manifestations in the Bible, Satan is not the definitive enemy we know today. In the oldest texts of the Old Testament, especially in Job's book, Satan is presented as a kind of accuser within the celestial court. In this context, its role is not so much that of an evil being, but that of a divine official whose function was to test the faith and righteousness of humans. In Job, Satan does not act dishonorously, it is a being who questions Job's purity before God, challenging the genuinity of his piety. It is a kind of antagonist who plays a trial, more than direct perversion. In the Old Testament, Satan is still an ambiguous figure, an opponent in a more impersonal sense than personal. His name, which derives from Hebrew a with macron n, simply means adversary or accuser. There is no clear identification with the absolute evil in these first stories, but with the function of a being that challenges, which tests, as an agent of chaos within the divine order. It is in this phase that we can see the gradual transformation of Satan, of a simple opponent to a more dangerous and complex figure. The jump towards a more defined understanding of Satan as the leader of evil occurs in the New Testament, where his figure takes a much more explicit form, such as the devil, the tempting, and the rebel par excellence. In the Gospels, Satan is described as the one who tempted Jesus in the desert, offering riches and power in exchange for his worship, clearly showing his role as tempting. Here, Satan presents himself as a being that not only challenges God, but also seeks to corrupt humanity, moving it away from the path of salvation. In these stories, its influence is no longer limited to impersonal tests, but directly seeks the fall of man. The key moment in the transformation of Satan as the leader of evil comes with his heavenly rebellion. In the Christian tradition, especially in the interpretation of apocalyptic texts, Satan is identified as the fallen angel who, in his pride, rebels against God. The passage of Isaiah 14 verses 12 to 15, often associated with the fall of Lucifer, describes how a celestial being, full of light and beauty, took pride in his own power and wanted to ascend above God. This rebellion was punished with his expulsion from heaven, which made him the leader of the fallen angels, who, like him, opposed the divine order. In the history of Christianity, this rebellion and fall expand in a richer narrative in which Satan becomes the main enemy of God and humanity. He is no longer only the accuser, but a being whose mission is to destroy the work of creation, corrupt human hearts and challenge divine power. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus mentions the fall of Satan as a ray that descends from heaven, a dramatic symbol of his definitive expulsion from the celestial kingdom. The figure of Satan, the devil, is not only associated with temptation and moral corruption, but also becomes the main architect of human suffering. Throughout Christian history, Satan has been seen as the being that incites sin, encourages violence, war, and the division, and is associated with everything that is negative and destructive in humanity. Satan's evil is not only a matter of desire, but a deliberate attempt to dismantle the divine order and drag souls towards condemnation. In medieval Christian literature, Satan is represented with a great symbolic burden, as a cunning and manipulative being, capable of disguising themselves as an angel of light to deceive the faithful. In works such as the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri, Satan is portrayed not only as a malevolent. The figure of Satan has also reinterpreted over the centuries. In the Renaissance and in modern thought, some authors and philosophers began to see Satan as a symbolic figure of free will and rebellion against authority. Works such as Lost Paradise by John Milton present him as a tragic character, a being who prefers the freedom of rebellion to divine submission, and whose fall is seen as an act of existential challenge. In this context, Satan becomes an ambiguous figure, the archetype of God, but also the symbol of the fight against destiny and oppression. Despite the various interpretations over time, a constant has remained: Satan, in his role as supreme adversary, is the being that faces God in the great cosmic struggle between good and evil. His fall, his rebellion, and his mission of corrupt and destroy are the basis of a narrative that has endured over the centuries, keeping Satan as the active substance of evil in the world. At present, Satan remains a central figure in Judeo Christian beliefs, representing everything that opposes the divine and good. Whether in the sacred texts, in popular culture, or in personal beliefs, Satan remains the symbol of rebellion, evil, and temptation, a figure that persists as the eternal adversary, whose purpose is to challenge and drag humanity towards darkness. Lucifer, a name that has been synonymous with beauty, light, and, finally, falling, evokes one of the most moving and tragic stories within the Judeo-Christian tradition. In his origins, Lucifer was not the demon or the angel of evil we know today. He was, on the other hand, a being of light, an original angel who occupied a position of honor in the celestial kingdom. His story, however, is not just that of a being who lost his place in heaven, it is that of a rebellion that changed the course of the spiritual history of humanity, transforming light into darkness, pride in condemnation. Lucifer's origin is an issue that has been mainly addressed in apocryphal texts and in interpretations of biblical passages that are not found in the official canon. In the Bible itself, the name Lucifer appears only once in the book of Isaiah 14 verse 12, where it is said, "How you fell from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning! How you were cut by land, you that weakened to the nations!" Here, the term Lucifer comes from the Latin lux ferens, which means bearer of light or morning star, referring to a being that emanated great light and splendor. However, this passage refers in its context to the fall of the king of Babylon, but over the centuries, Christians have played Lucifer as a symbolic representation of the fall of a rebel angel, a celestial being who, by his pride, disobeyed God. Lucifer's complete story as fallen angel, rebellion, and transformation in the devil develops mainly in apocryphal texts, such as the Book of Enoch and the Book of Wisdom, as well as in medieval Christian literature. The Book of Enoch, a text attributed to Enoch, Noah's great-grandfather, offers a more detailed vision of the rebellion of the fallen angels. Enoch speaks of a series of angels, known as the guards, or the Grigori, who descended to the earth and joined with the daughters of men, corrupted to humanity. Although the book does not explicitly mention Lucifer, many later interpreters saw parallels between these fallen angels and the angel who rebelled against God. One of the clearest representations of Lucifer's fall as the leader of a heavenly rebellion comes from the medieval tradition, especially in works such as the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri and in the writings of the Church's Fathers. In these stories, Lucifer is not only an angel who rebelled, but a tragic figure, the first being that rejected God's will in his desire for power and supremacy. According to Dante, Lucifer, in his arrogance, rebelled against God for his own desire to be like him, to challenge the divine order. The medieval poet describes Lucifer as a being of great beauty and cunning, but blinded by his pride, which led him to his fall. This rebellion condemned him to be banished from heaven and thrown into hell, where he remains caught in eternal ice, unable to redemption. Medieval interpretations deepen the idea that Lucifer was the first being that, in his free will, chose to disobey God. This disobedience, fed by his pride and desire to power, led him to gather other fallen angels who shared his vision of rebellion. The famous heavenly battle described in the Apocalypse is seen in many traditions, such as the culminating moment of Lucifer's rebellion. In this battle, Lucifer and his followers fight against Los Angeles loyal to God, led by Miguel, the Archangel Guerrero. As a result of this fight, Lucifer is defeated and thrown at the depths of hell. With the passage of time, the figure of Lucifer was impregnated with different meanings. In the Middle Ages, he was seen as the principle of evil, but also as a tragic being, a figure that represented the fight against authority and rebellion. In Milton's work, Lost Paradise, Lucifer presents himself as a complex and ambiguous character, whose pride leads him to challenge God. The famous phrase, "better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven," is attributed to Lucifer in this epic poem, which reinforces the idea that its fall was not simply an act of evil, but a struggle for freedom, although it was fatal and wrong. In modernity, Lucifer has been reinterpreted in various ways. In the philosophical and literary context, some have seen it as a symbol of individual freedom and rebellion against oppression. For authors such as Lord Byron, or even in the thought of some romantics, Lucifer represented the human being who challenges the divine impositions and struggles for his own destiny, even if that challenge leads him to perdition. This vision of Lucifer, as a tragic rebel, has endured to this day, even influencing some subcultures and popular culture, where he is portrayed as a figure that seeks power and autonomy at the expense of any sacrifice. However, from a theological perspective, Lucifer's fall remains an act of absolute disobedience. It is the representation of a being created for the good and perfection that, when yielding to pride and self-complacency, becomes the principle of evil. His fall not only represented the end of its beauty and splendor, but also the breakdown of heavenly harmony, an act that triggered the struggle between good and evil in all creation. Lucifer, the fallen angel, is a figure that has transcended its biblical and apocryphal origin. From its existence as a radiant and glorious being to its transformation in the leader of evil, its history has evolved, but has always remained a warning, a reminder that pride and desire to be able to destroy even the purest and most pure sublime. Lucifer's fall is ultimately the story of the transformation of good into evil, an irreversible decline that changed fate not only Lucifer himself, but of all humanity. Beelzebub, whose name means Lord of the Flies, is one of the most disconcerting and scary figures in the demonic pantheon of the Judeo Christian tradition. His name resonates with a mixture of repulsion and power, and its history is wrapped in mystery, from its origins in the ancient cultures to its adoption and transformation in the figure of one of the most feared princes of hell. Beelzebub is not just any demon, his title and his figure invoke the presence of something bigger and more sinister, which dominates corruption and chaos. The name Beelzebub has its roots in the old region of the Philistines, where reference was made to him as Beelzebub, which translates as the Lord of the Fly. In his first records, Beelzebub was not necessarily seen as a demon, but as a pagan deity linked to healing and protection. In the Philistia cities of Ekron and other areas of the Levante, the cult of Beelzebub was popular, and this god was considered a healer and protector, especially in times of pests. It was believed that this god had the ability to move away pests, cure diseases, and protect the communities from insects that could cause damage to crops. However, with the arrival of Judeo Christian monotheism and the demonization of the pagan gods, Beelzebub was transformed from a benevolent deity to a dark demon. In the Bible, Beelzebub is briefly mentioned in the second book of the Kings, 2 Kings 1 verses 2-3, where King Uzziah of Israel, seriously ill, sends messengers to consult Beelzebub in Ekron. Prophet Elijah, upon learning of this, rebukes him for going to a false god and challenges him openly. Here, Beelzebub begins to be associated with falsehood and the tie-on to true faith, a transition that would mark its transformation into a demonic figure. In the New Testament, Beelzebub is clearly linked to evil. Jesus is accused by the Pharisees of expelling demons through the power of Beelzebub, suggesting that he is the prince of demons. In the Gospels, the name of Beelzebub becomes synonymous with Satan or the devil, and is presented as the leader of a legion of demons that serve the interests of the dark forces. In this context, Beelzebub is no longer only an isolated demon, but the commander of evil spirits looking to corrupt and destroy the divine work. Beelzebub's relationship with flies, his best-known title, has a double connotation. On the one hand, it is related to the idea of the plague, which in many cultures is seen as a divine punishment or as the manifestation of corruption and evil. Flies, as insects that feed on decomposition and rot, are symbols of decline and deterioration. On the other hand, the presence of flies also symbolizes the invasion of contaminated, impure, which is away from perfection and divine purity. In Christian mythology, this Beelzebub association with flies presents it as the demon that sows corruption, disease, and decomposition both in the human body and in the soul. Over the centuries, the figure of Beelzebub has evolved in folklore and popular culture. During the Middle Ages, he was portrayed as one of the princes of hell, a demon who had great power and authority over other evil spirits. In some versions of the Inferno de Dante Alighieri, Beelzebub occupies a central position in hell, governing along with Lucifer. It is represented as a monstrous figure, often grotesque, which distills the repulsion of the corrupt and the rot. Its connection with flies reinforces the image of a being whose presence is associated with the lowest and abject, the symbol of rot and chaos. Beelzebub also appears in numerous literary and artistic works, where his figure has been subject to fascination and terror. In John Milton's Lost Paradise, although Lucifer is the main protagonist, Beelzebub is his lieutenant and is shown as a cunning and manipulative demon, which acts as the right arm of the Prince of Hell. Milton describes him as a being that, although subjugated by his own tragic destiny, constantly seeks ways of destabilizing and corrupting the world created by God. Beelzebub's influence on popular culture has also been significant. In many horror stories and in the modern representations of Satanism, Beelzebub is often cited as the Lord of Demons or the Prince of Flies, which reinforces his image of power and evil. In Gothic literature and horror films, he has been portrayed as the leader of a demonic rebellion, a being whose purpose is to sow chaos, disease, and despair in the human world. Its connection with flies has remained as a powerful symbol of imminent corruption. In some modern traditions, Beelzebub is considered the demon that has control over worldly temptations, sin of gluttony and material decline. In the field of demonology, powers related to the manipulation of the lowest human passions and the inclination to selfish and destructive pleasure are assigned. Throughout history, Beelzebub has been a complex figure, with multiple facets ranging from the Lord of the Flies and the Plague to the commander of the demonic hosts. Its evolution reflects the process by which ancient deities and pagan figures were reconfigured in symbols of evil within Judeo Christian theology. But beyond its origin and representations, Beelzebub remains a deeply rooted figure in collective imagination, a symbol of darkness that stalks in the shadows, waiting to invade and corrupt everything that is pure and sacred. The Leviathan, a mythical creature mentioned in the scriptures of the Old Testament, has become a powerful symbol of chaos and destruction, representing the primordial disorder that challenges the divine order. Its presence, throughout the sacred texts, is not only a physical manifestation, but a metaphor for the cosmic struggle between order and chaos, a recurring theme in the Judeo Christian tradition. In the Bible, Leviathan appears mainly in Job's books, Isaiah, and Psalms, and his image has evolved over the centuries, acquiring different interpretations based on historical and theological contexts. In Job's book, Leviathan is described as a formidable beast, impossible to dominate for man, and with characteristics that overflow the limits of nature. It is a marine creature, described with impenetrable skin, sharp teeth, and a breath so powerful that the sea can set fire. In Job 41, it is said that nobody is so bold as to awaken, underlining his indomitable character and his ability to sow terror. In this context, Leviathan is not only a physical monster, but also a symbol of the uncontrollable forces that exist outside the reach of man and that challenge the stability of the cosmos created by God. In the Hebrew tradition, Leviathan is frequently associated with primary chaos, a topic found in many ancient stories about the creation of the world. In the Bible, chaos is described as the original state of the universe, a dark and without a form that was ordered by the word of God during creation. Leviathan, being such a terrifying and chaotic beast, represents that uncontrolled force that exists before the divine order, a symbol of everything that is out of the control of ordered creation. However, the figure of Leviathan is not limited to the Old Testament. His symbolism is even more enriched when his relationship with the apocalypse and the end of time is observed. In the book of Isaiah, specifically in Isaiah 27 verse 1, it is prophesied that in the great day of the final judgment, God will punish with his sword, hard and large, the Leviathan, squeezed snake, and will kill the dragon that is in the sea. This representation of the Leviathan as a squeezed snake connects its figure with that of other apocalyptic monsters, such as the dragon of the Apocalypse, which is identified with Satan. In this sense, Leviathan is not only a physical creature, but also a symbol of evil and resistance to God's will, a figure that will be defeated in the final judgment. In the apocalyptic context, Leviathan is seen as a manifestation of the forces of evil that oppose the kingdom of God. His defeat, therefore, is not only an act of divine power, but an affirmation of the triumph of the divine order over the primary chaos, the light over the dark. The fight against Leviathan is a metaphor of the cosmic conflict in which good, represented by God and his followers, will overcome evil, represented by the forces of destruction and disorder that Leviathan symbolizes. In the Christian tradition, Leviathan also has a fundamental role in eschatological theology, since it is linked to the final struggle between good and evil described in the Apocalypse. In this text, the dragon is defeated, and with him, all the forces of evil that have been operating in the world. Leviathan, as a symbol of those chaotic and destructive forces, is also defeated at the end of time. This defeat is not only presented as an act of divine judgment, but also as a restoration of order, a return to the state of peace and perfection that existed before chaos introduced evil in the world. The Leviathan, in its role as a symbol of chaos, has deep philosophical and theological implications. First, it represents the forces that threaten the divine order, and its defeat in the final judgment is a confirmation that evil, although present in the world, does not have the last word. It is a reminder that, although the forces of destruction may seem invincible, in the end they will give in to the divine power. The battle against Leviathan is also a metaphor for the internal struggle that each individual faces against temptations and chaos in their own life. Leviathan, with its enormous power and its destructive nature, can be seen as a representation of spiritual challenges and forces of evil that human beings must face in their daily lives. Over the centuries, the figure of Leviathan has been the subject of various interpretations, not only in the biblical context, but also in literature, art, and philosophy. In the Middle Ages, Leviathan was used by thinkers like Thomas Hobbes to represent the absolute authority of the state, in his famous Leviathan work. Hobbes used the name of the creature to symbolize the power of the sovereign, a force that, although it seems to be at the service of peace and order, can also be seen as a potentially destructive force if it is uncontrolled. In the Christian context, Leviathan remains a figure of great power and threat, but it is also a symbol of divine protection, a reminder that chaos can be dominated by the power of the divine order. In addition, Leviathan has endured in popular culture as a symbol of the struggle between order and chaos, good and evil. His image, with his monstrous size and his indomitable nature, has been portrayed in numerous fiction works, from films to video games, where he continues to represent the eternal struggle between destructive and creative forces. In these modern representations, Leviathan is often an ambiguous figure, a creature that challenges morality and that can be both a villain and a being attracted pardo in his own destructive nature. Ultimately, the Leviathan remains one of the most powerful symbols of the Judeo Christian tradition, representing not only chaos and destruction, but also the challenge facing the forces of good to maintain order and harmony. His defeat at the end of time is an affirmation that, despite adversities, divine power will prevail over evil, and the eternal order will be restored. Lilith, the figure wrapped in mystery and controversy, emerges in history as a persistent shadow that is intertwined with ancient myths and cultural traditions. His name evokes a mixture of fascination and fear, and its history, deeply rooted in Mesopotamian and Hebrew traditions, has evolved to represent both rebellion and darkness. In the narratives, Lilith is described as the first woman who challenged the established order, and as a demon, an entity that stalks on the margins of humanity, challenging the limits of the known. In the Hebrew traditions, Lilith appears as Adam's first wife, created not of her rib, such as Eva, but of the same dust of the earth. This equality in its origin would be, paradoxically, the source of the conflict between them. According to some texts, including Ben Sirar's alphabet, Lilith refused to undergo Adam, rejecting his authority and claiming his independence. In his desire for equality, he pronounced the ineffable name of God and fled the Eden. This act of disobedience made Lilith a figure of rebellion, a woman who challenged patriarchal norms and rejected a role imposed by creation. Lilith's escape took her to the lands beyond Eden, inhospitable places and full of darkness, where it is said that she found refuge among demons. There, according to tradition, it became a dangerous and feared entity, associated with the death of newborns and the seduction of men. It is described as a night spirit, a being that stalks at night, feeding on the fear and vulnerability of humans. His name, in some interpretations, is related to the Hebrew word Lael, which means night, reinforcing its connection with the hidden and the unknown. However, Lilith does not arise exclusively from the Judeo Christian context. His figure has deep roots in Mesopotamian traditions, where female spirits such as Lilitu and Ardat Lili were already known. These spirits were considered demons that were around at night, causing diseases and problems to humans. In Sumerian mythology, similar figures appear in ancient stories, as in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Lilitu is mentioned as a wandering and threatening spirit. This connection shows how Lilith is a bridge between the old polytheistic beliefs and later monotheistic narratives, an example of how myths evolve and adapt to new worldviews. In the Mesopotamian context, Lilith and the spirits related to it also symbolized the indomitable force of nature and chaos that existed before order. They represented what could not be controlled, overflowing fertility, the cycles of life and death, and the power of the feminine that challenged the established norms. In this sense, Lilith was not only a demonic being, but also a reminder of the limits of human and divine power. Over time, Lilith was transforming into the Hebrew tradition into an even more sinister figure. It was associated with the murder of children, especially men, and with the ability to seduce men in dreams, stealing their vitality. It was believed that it carried a terrifying beauty, capable of attracting and destroying at the same time. To protect themselves from it, ancient Jewish communities resorted to amulets and enchantments. In some amulets found in archaeological excavations, you can read inscriptions such as Stay, Lilith, and sacred names that were used to repel their influence. These artifacts show how fear towards Lilith was deeply rooted in everyday life. Lilith's representation as a demon also reflects a broader symbolic struggle, the tension between the patriarchal order and the forces that resisted being controlled. His rejection of submitting to Adam and his subsequent demonization can be interpreted as a narrative that punishes those who question authority and traditional structures. In this sense, Lilith becomes a figure that challenges not only Adam, but also God, challenging the divine and human hierarchy. However, with the passage of time, Lilith has also been claimed as a female resistance and power symbol. In modernity, feminist movements have embraced their figure as an emblem of the struggle for equality and autonomy. Lilith, the woman who refused to be subordinate, has become a representation of feminine strength and determination. In this context, its history is no longer only a warning or a conviction, but a celebration of the ability to challenge the norms and claim freedom. Despite its demonization, Lilith remains a complex and multifaceted figure. In it, aspects of femininity, rebellion, darkness, and power converge. It is both a threat and an inspiration, a being that embodies fear towards the unknown and respect for the indomitable. Its history, although rooted in ancient traditions, continues to resonate in the present, reminding us that the figures of the past not only reflect the fears and beliefs of their times, but also the struggles and desires that transcend time. Asmodeus, known as the demon of lust, is a figure that has captured imagination and fear throughout the Judeo Christian tradition. His name evokes desire, sin, and chaos, and his influence extends from ancient texts to modern cultural interpretations. It represents not only indulgence in carnal pleasures, but also the devastation it can cause when these impulses are not controlled. The history of Asmodeus is woven with myths, warnings, and symbolisms that reflect the complexity of human emotions and temptations that threaten to divert the souls of their spiritual path. The name Asmodeus has roots in the Helvetic language, the sacred language of Zoroastrismo, where the word Ashma means anger or violence. This connection with Zoroastrismo is crucial, since many ideas about demons in Judaism and Christianity have Persian influences. This story not only shows the strength and cunning of Asmodeus, but also its ability to infiltrate the heart of human power, sowing chaos and corruption. The Book of Tobias, an apocryphal text of the Old Testament, offers another representation of Asmodeus, this time as a demon that causes suffering and death. In this story, Asmodeus is obsessed with Sarah, a woman who loses 7 consecutive husbands, since the demon kills them before they can consummate the marriage. This act not only underlines its violent and possessive nature, but also its ability to destroy the sacred, such as the marriage union. It is in this context where the Archangel Raphael appears, who helps Tobias, Sarah's future husband, to defeat Asmodeus using the liver and heart of a fish, burned to scare away the demon. This confrontation highlights the struggle between the forces of good and evil, and divine intervention as salvation against demonic forces. Asmodeus' figure is also loaded with symbolism. As a demon of lust, not only the acts of excessive carnal desire are attributed to him, but also the envy, anger, and selfishness that often accompany the unbridled indulgence. In subsequent traditions, especially during the Middle Ages, Asmodeus was represented as one of the 7 princes of hell, directly associating it with one of the capital sins, lust. These representations show it as an attractive and seductive being, but also as a destructive force that can ruin lives and souls. In the arts and literature, Asmodeus has been portrayed with a variety of forms. He is often represented with monstrous features, dragon wings, rooster feet, and a snake tail, symbols of his infernal nature. However, human characteristics are also attributed, particularly when it is presented as a tempting that seduces and corrupts. This contrast between the human and the monstrous highlights the ambiguity of his figure, a being that reflects human weaknesses and temptations, but taken to the demonic extreme. The cultural impact of Asmodeus goes beyond religious texts. His figure has been used as a mirror to explore the internal struggles of the human being with the temptation, desire, and consequences of sin. In the literature, works such as The Devil Fuck of Louis Valesta Guevara present to Asmodeus as a cunning and sarcastic character, offering a satirical perspective about hypocrisy and corruption of society. These interpretations humanize him, showing that the demon is not always in the dark corners, but also in human behaviors and choices. Asmodeus' influence also extends to psychology and philosophy, where his figure has been used to analyze the complexities of human nature. Its connection with lust, anger, and envy makes it a symbol of impulses that, although natural, can become destructive if they are not controlled. In this sense, Asmodeus is not only an external adversary, but also a representation of the internal struggles that people face when trying to balance their wishes with their values and principles. Over the centuries, Asmodeus has maintained its place as a figure that causes both fear and fascination. His presence in sacred texts, legends, and popular culture continues to remember humanity the dangers of excess, temptation, and loss of control. At the same time, its history highlights the importance of strength, faith, and divine intervention to resist forces that threaten to divert the souls of the way to light. Belial, a name that resonates as a dark echo through the centuries, is associated with the incarnation of evil and decay. From the ancient writings to the medieval representations, their figure has been a symbol of disobedience, corruption, and the chaos that arises when the divine order is rejected. His mention in sacred texts and his evolution as a powerful demon makes him one of the most feared and complex presences within the Judeo Christian tradition. In the Hebrew Bible, the Belial term appears on multiple occasions, but initially not as its own name, but as a concept. Derived from the Belial Hebrew, which can be translated as without value, or without utility, this word is used to describe evil people or behaviors, lacking morality and acting in open opposition to God. In this context, Belial is not an individual or an entity, but rather a representation of the impious and the corrupt. Those described as children of Belials are pointed out as traitors, blasphemous, or sinners who undermine the moral fabric of the community. One of the most disturbing passages where Belial is mentioned is in the book of Deuteronomy, where the children of Belial are accused of inciting the Israelites to worship other gods, an act that was considered a direct threat to the covenant between God and his people. Here, the term not only designates individual evil, but also the spread of spiritual corruption, a sin that could contaminate a whole nation. This early use feels the basis for the subsequent customization of Belial as a demonic figure. Over time, in apocryphal texts and in intertestamentary literature, Belial begins to acquire a more defined character. In writings such as the manuscripts of the Dead Sea, he is mentioned as a leader of the forces of the darkness, in direct contrast with the heavenly armies led by the Archangel Miguel. In the war role, for example, Belial is presented as the commander of the children of darkness who fight against the children of light in an apocalyptic battle for the destiny of the world. In this context, Belial not only represents moral evil, but also a cosmic power that actively challenges the divine plan. As Christianity emerged and developed, the figure of Belial was integrated into beliefs about the underworld and the kingdom of demons. In the New Testament, although its mention is brief, it is significant. In 2 Corinthians 6 verse 15, Paul uses Belial as a synonym for Satan, asking rhetorically, what harmony can there be between Christ and Belial? This passage establishes a direct link between Belial and the absolute evil, consolidating it as an adversary of the Messiah and an enemy of humanity. In the Middle Ages, demonology flourished as a branch of theology and folklore, and Belial was endowed with a more elaborate identity. In the grimoires and demonological treatises, he is described as one of the princes of hell, known for his cunning, his eloquence and his ability to corrupt men through promises of wealth and power. According to these traditions, Belial does not always act through brute force, but seduces with soft words and subtle deceptions, leading their victims to their own destruction. This image reinforces its role as a teacher of manipulation and corruption, a formidable enemy that uses human weaknesses as their main weapon. One of the best-known grimoires, the Leviathan or the Minor Key of Solomon, describes it as a high-ranking demon that commands legions of infernal spirits. It is said that Belial grants favors to those who invoke it, but always at a high price, since its intention is diverting souls from the path of salvation. In these representations, powers are attributed to grant titles, wealth and prestige, but his help always leads to spiritual ruin. Medieval literature also contributed to shaping the figure of Belial as a symbol of human decline. In works such as The Lost Paradise of John Milton, although it is not explicitly mentioned, the spirit of Belial seems to be embodied in the demons that represent betrayal and hypocrisy. These texts not only present it as an enemy of the heavenly order, but as a warning about the dangers of excessive ambition and moral corruption. Belial also has a particular place in the artistic representations of the time, where he is shown with an appearance that reflects his duality, a figure of great beauty, capable of deceiving the unsuspecting, but with grotesque details that hint at his true demonic nature. These images reinforce the idea that evil is not always evident at first sight and that it can hide behind an attractive facade. What makes Belial especially disturbing is not only its power, but its ability to personify the internal struggles of humanity. It represents the temptation to reject good, attraction for the forbidden, and the inevitable fall that follows the abandonment of moral principles. Its history is a mirror that reflects the fears and desires of each era, reminding us that evil does not always come with a terrible face, but that it often disguises itself as desirable, something irresistible. The figure of Belial is still a warning, not only of the external forces that threaten Corromper, but also the internal battles that we all face against ambition, greed, and selfishness. In it, the supernatural and the human are intertwined, offering a chilling vision of how evil can infiltrate the hearts and structures of society, leaving a trace of chaos and desolation in its path. Mammon, Astaroth, and other notable demonic figures have left deep traces in theology and culture, personifying dark aspects of human behavior and representing forces that challenge divine balance. Over the centuries, these names have been invoked both in religious warnings and in literary and artistic stories, becoming symbols of temptation, corruption, and excessive power. Each of them embodies a sin or a weakness, a fragment of the collective shadow of humanity that has inspired fear and fascination in equal extent. Mammon is the demon that personifies greed, and obsession with material wealth. His name, derived from the Aramaic mna with macron, means money or wealth. In the New Testament, Jesus warns his followers, "You cannot serve God and mammon," Matthew 6 verse 24, establishing a clear opposition between the service to the Creator and the submission to earthly goods. Mammon is not a demon of violence or open deception, but one that works subtly, infiltrating the human heart and sowing an insatiable desire to accumulate, often at the expense of morality and empathy. In medieval representations, Mammon appears as a grotesque being, loaded with gold and jewels, surrounded by the ruins that its greed has caused. These images reinforce the idea that the unbridled desire of wealth inevitably leads to destruction, not only of those who seek it, but also those trapped in their way. Mammon is a reminder that the worship of the material is a form of spiritual slavery, a sin that consumes slowly but inexorably. Astaroth, on the other hand, is a figure wrapped in mystery and duality. Its origin can be tracked to the ancient goddesses of fertility, as spotted in Canaan and Phoenician cultures. Over time, this female deity was demonized in the Judeo Christian tradition, becoming Astaroth, a prince of hell associated with laziness, forbidden knowledge and manipulation. This change reflects not only the evolution of religious beliefs, but also how cultures transformed ancient gods into demons by integrating them into new worldviews. In medieval grimoires, Astaroth is described as a wise and eloquent demon, which has a vast knowledge of the secrets of heaven and earth. He is often represented as a naked man with wings, riding an infernal dragon and carrying a snake. Its appearance, mixture of attractiveness and monstrosity, symbolizes the temptation of prohibited knowledge, a gift that, although valuable, has a dangerous cost. Astaroth seduces not with carnal pleasures, but with promises of intellectual power, attracting those who seek to understand the incomprehensible, even at the risk of their souls. Other notable demons, although less mentioned, also have roles significational in demonology. His connection with laziness lies in his ability to tempt people to seek results effortlessly, taking advantage of his desire to obtain rewards without sacrifice. In iconography, he is represented as a being sitting in a toilet, a raw but effective symbol of inaction and decay. Baal, another prominent name, has its roots in the ancient Semitic gods. In Christian demonology, Baal becomes an infernal leader, associated with pride and arrogance. Often represented with multiple heads, man, cat, and toad, symbolizes the multiplicity of roads offered by sin. His figure is both an echo of his old status as a powerful god as a warning of how pride can lead to the fall. Moloch, a demon that personifies human sacrifice, is one of the most scary in the Judeo-Christian tradition. It is described as an insatiable being, which demands blood taxes and destruction. In the Bible, Israelites are warned against the worship of Moloch, who was associated with rituals involving the sacrifice of children. In subsequent interpretations, its image becomes a symbol of the extreme cost of ambition and fanaticism, a reminder of atrocities that can be committed in the name of corrupt ideals. Each of these demons has a unique place in the narrative of the struggle between good and evil. His symbolism transcends the supernatural, acting as personifications of human weaknesses and the dangers that lurk when he gives in to sin. These demons not only represent external threats, but also internal struggles that all face: Mammon's greed, the seduction of prohibited knowledge of Astaroth, the inaction of Belphegor, Baal's pride, and the extreme sacrifice of Moloch. In modern culture, these figures continue to inspire stories, reflections, and warnings. From literature to cinema, his presence continues to remind us that demons are not always abroad. Often, they reside within us, manifesting in our desires, fears, and elections. These ancient names still whisper in the contemporary world, inviting to reflect on the limits of our actions and the nature of evil in all its forms. The concept of hell, that vast and feared abode of demons, has captivated and terrified of humanity for millennia. Its origin and the multiple visions that have been reflected in art and literature reflect a deep concern for the ultimate destiny of souls and the eternal struggle between good and evil. In its most primitive roots, hell was not the place of torment that we imagine today, but a shadow of what would be with the passage of eras and the evolution of beliefs. In the ancient Hebrew traditions, the concept of hell was linked to Sheol, an underground region where the dead resided in a state of shadows and silence. This place was not necessarily punishment, but a neutral space where all souls, fair and unfair, rested. However, the idea of a division between the destinations of souls began to emerge, influenced by cultural interactions with the Persians and their belief in a post-mortem judgment. The impact of Zoroastrian dualism is key in this transformation. According to this doctrine, the universe was divided between the forces of good, led by Ahura Mazda, and those of evil, headed by Angra Mainyu. After death, souls were judged and sent to a heavenly abode or an abyss of torments. This abyss, similar to what would later be Judeo Christian hell, introduced the notion of eternal punishment as a consequence of earthly actions. These ideas were leaked in Jewish tradition during exile in Babylon, and over time, they consolidated in primitive Christian teaching. With the advent of Christianity, hell acquired a more concrete definition. The New Testament texts, particularly the words of Jesus, describe the Gehenna, a place of eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. This term, derived from the Hinnom Valley, southwest of Jerusalem, originally referred to a place where human sacrifices were made in honor of Moloch. Subsequently, the place was used as a garbage dump where the remains constantly burned, a powerful image to symbolize the perpetual torment. The primitive church amplified these images, using the idea of hell as a tool for morality and control. In medieval thought, hell became a place of personalized punishments, designed to reflect the specific sins of who fell into their depths. Writers and artists of the time gave life to this place of eternal despair, populated by demons that inflicted unimaginable torments to condemned souls. One of the most influential representations of hell is found in the Divine Comedy of Dante Alighieri. This medieval epic poem describes hell as an abyss divided into 9 circles, each reserved for a specific sin, from lust and greed to betrayal. In the center of hell, Satan himself remains caught in an ice lake, an image that defies the usual conceptions of eternal fire. Dante's vision not only consolidated the architecture of hell in collective imagination, but also reflected the moral and political concerns of his time. Medieval and Renaissance art also contributed to shaping the imaginary of hell. Painters like Hieronymus Bosch captured chaotic and grotesque visions of tormented souls, monstrous demons, and infernal landscapes full of fire, sulfur, and darkness. Works such as The Garden of Delicias have a disturbing and detailed interpretation of eternal suffering, capturing visceral terror associated with divine punishment. In modern literature, authors such as John Milton in Lost Paradise further expanded the concept of hell. Milton describes it as a vast and dark kingdom, a counterpoint to the celestial splendor, where fallen demons conspire to take revenge on God and destroy creation. In its narrative, hell is not only a physical place, but also a state of absolute separation of divine grace, an alienation that constitutes the greatest punishment of all. Beyond texts and paintings, hell has become a powerful metaphor in contemporary culture. Theater, film, and literature works have used it to explore issues such as guilt, repentance, and nature of evil. Films such as The Seventh Seal of Ingmar Bergman or novels such as Dorian Gray's Portrait of Oscar Wilde show how hell is not always a literal place, but an internal experience, a self-imposed prison created by our choices and actions. In each iteration of hell, the fire burns not only as a symbol of torment, but as a warning against the forgetfulness of the sacred and the moral. This place, imagined in all its forms, is a reflection of the deepest fears of the human being, the fear of punishment, darkness, and the unfathomable abyss of eternal loneliness. The Middle Ages marked a period in which demonology reached its maximum expression as both religious and cultural discipline. The demons ceased to be abstract figures of ancient texts to become concrete and omnipresent enemies in everyday life. During these centuries, obsession with evil and its agents shaped innumerable persecutions, texts, and representations that reveal the fears and tensions of a deeply religious society. The Inquisition, established to protect the purity of the Christian faith, was one of the driving forces behind the demonization of certain behaviors and beliefs. It was believed that the devil was active in the world, looking for souls for corrupting, and his agents were human that, through infernal pacts, became instruments of his will. Witches, heretics, and other deviants were pointed out as the main allies of evil, and their persecution became a spiritual and political effort. The fear of demons not only justified witch hunt, but also resulted in a methodical identification and eradication system of its alleged allies. Torture and forced confession were used to extract detailed stories from diabolical, coven and sorcery covers, feeding a paranoia cycle that extended in Europe. Texts such as the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, became essential manuals for inquisitors and judges, providing guidelines to recognize and condemn the servants of the devil. This book, written in 1487 by the inquisitors Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, consolidated the idea that the witches were not only heretics, but also worshippers of the demon. In parallel, the grimoires, books of magic and esoteric knowledge, became another manifestation of interest in demonology. Although officially convicted by the Church, these texts circulated in secret between alchemists, occult, and scholars who sought to control or understand demonic forces. The grimoires contained rituals, invocations, and descriptions of infernal hierarchies, revealing an underground world where forbidden knowledge flourished in the shadows of religious orthodoxy. One of the most famous grimoires is Ars Goetia, a section of the Leamington or Solomon clavicle, which details the appointments, characteristics and powers of 72 demons, as well as the methods to invoke and control them. According to legend, King Solomon, known for his wisdom, would have obtained this knowledge directly from heaven and hell, using it to build his great temple. This text, with its elaborate diagrams and magical formulas, reflects a persistent fascination for the power and capacity of demons, even within a framework of religious condemnation. The art and literature of the time also played a fundamental role in the configuration of demonology. The frescoes of the cathedrals and the illustrations of the medieval manuscripts represented grotesque demons that tormented sinners, reinforcing the message of the Church about the need to live a fair life. These images, often surreal and terrifying, captured the imagination of common people and consolidated a vision of hell and its inhabitants as a tangible threat. The demons were not only seen as future punishments, but also as influences present in daily life. Diseases, natural disasters, and personal crises were attributed to demonic activity. Even emotional states such as deep sadness or anger were often explained as a result of infernal possessions or attacks. This belief encouraged the dependence of religious rituals such as exorcisms and the blessing of objects and spaces, practices that multiplied during the Middle Ages. The medieval theatre also participated in the construction of this demonic obsession. The religious works known as mysteries and miracles dramatized the struggles between good and evil, with demons as main antagonists. These characters, although feared, were often represented with a touch of grotesque comedy, highlighting their mocking nature and their inevitability in the divine scheme. As the Middle Ages advanced, demonology began to transform. The arrival of the Renaissance brought an interest renewed by ancient knowledge and a more critical attitude towards superstitions. However, the echoes of medieval obsession with demons persisted, feeding literature, art, and popular culture for centuries. The demons, in their medieval form, remained in the collective imaginary as symbols of temptation, transgression, and the eternal conflict between the soul and the dark forces that seek to possess it. This historical period, so loaded with fear and fervor, not only defined thinking about demons, but also left an inheritance that continues to influence how these figures are represented and understood today. Despite the passage of time, the echoes of medieval demonology resonate strongly, reminding us of how fear of evil can mold entire societies and define complete eras. The Renaissance, a period of deep cultural and artistic change, also marked a transformation in the perception of angels and demons. This movement, driven by the rediscovery of classical antiquity and a renewed interest in humanity, did not eliminate the fear or fascination with the supernatural, but rather reformulated them under new philosophical, theological, and aesthetic perspectives. In the first days of the Renaissance, the medieval conception of angels and demons remained in force largely. The angels were seen as celestial guardians, messengers of God and protectors of the divine order. The demons, on the other hand, continued to represent chaos, temptation, and evil. However, the rebirth introduced a more humanistic approach, which placed man in the center of the universe, which deeply affected how these figures were represented and understood. In the artistic field, Los Angeles acquired a new dimension of beauty and humanity. Renaissance painters, influenced by the classic ideals of proportion and harmony, represented angels with serene faces, delicate bodies, and almost divine perfection. Artists such as Raphael and Botticelli portrayed them as close beings, less ethereal than their medieval predecessors, but equally majestic. The wings of Los Angeles, a symbol of their celestial nature, were painted with a level of detail and luminosity that reflected their direct connection with the sky. On the other hand, demons began to appear in art more complex and less grotesque than in the Middle Ages. While they were still deformed and scary creatures, some artists began to represent them with a tragedy aura, as fallen beings that evoke both fear and compassion. This duality can be seen in works such as those of Michelangelo, who embodied the suffering of condemned souls and their tormentor in a visual language of intense emotionality and dynamism. The famous Final Judgment scene in the Sistine Chapel is a masterful example of this new representation of angels and demons, where the fight between the two is as terrifying as sublime. The Renaissance also introduced a significant change in the theological approach to angels and demons. While the Middle Ages emphasized the function of angels as guardians of divine order and demons as absolute adversaries, Renaissance thinkers, influenced by Neoplatonism, began to explore the most abstract nature of these entities. Philosophers such as Marsilio Ficino and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola saw Los Angeles as intermediaries between the divine and human world, beings that could inspire men towards knowledge and virtue. The demons, meanwhile, began to be interpreted more symbolically. Some thinkers considered them manifestations of the negative impulses of humanity, such as greed, lust, and pride, instead of independent entities. This approach reflected the rationalist spirit of the Renaissance, which sought more human explanations for phenomena that were previously attributed exclusively to the supernatural. In literature, fascination with angels and demons also found a new expression. Works such as John Milton's Lost Paradise, although published at the end of the Renaissance period, reflect this duality and complexity. Milton presents Satan not only as the adversary of God, but also as a tragic figure, a being of immense power and ambition that suffers the consequences of his rebellion. This vision resonated with Renaissance concerns about human ambition and the limits of freedom. The theatre, particularly in England, also explored the interactions between angels, demons, and human. In works such as Dr. Faustus of Christopher Marlowe, demons are not simply evil, but tempting that reflect the protagonist's own struggles. Lucifer and Mephistopheles are presented with a nuance of psychological depth, a reflection of the growing complexity with which these figures were addressed. In the popular culture of the Renaissance, angels and demons remain central elements of devotion and fear. The exorcisms, for example, remained as common practices, and the grimoires continued to circulate between the occult and curious. However, these texts began to adopt a more scientific tone, trying to categorize and understand angels and demons methodically. Renaissance grimoires, such as Heptameron or that of Occulta Philosophia of Agrippa, reflect this attempt to merge magic with natural philosophy. Despite the advances of critical thinking and science, the Renaissance did not extinguish beliefs in angels and demons. On the contrary, these figures adapted and evolved, integrating into the new forms of thought and artistic expression. His presence remained a constant reminder of the invisible forces that, according to the beliefs of the time, influenced the destiny of men. In a period of great discoveries and cultural transformation, angels and demons continued to be symbols of the extremes of human experience, aspiration towards divine and the fall towards the abysmal. This balance between the heavenly and the infernal, between light and shadow, defined not only religious beliefs, but also the very soul of the Renaissance. Demonology in Protestantism and Catholicism developed in different ways, reflecting the theological and narrative differences between these two branches of Christianity. Although both traditions shared a fundamental belief in the existence of demons as agents of evil, their interpretations and emphasis varied, molded by their respective historical and doctrinal contexts. In Catholicism, demonology was deeply intertwined with the hierarchical and sacramental structure of the Church. The demons were seen as real and active forces in the world, responsible for tempting individuals and disturbing the divine order. The Catholic Church developed an extensive system of rituals and practices to combat its influence, being exorcism one of the most prominent. These rituals, encoded in texts such as the Romanum ritual, reflected confidence in the power of the sacraments and ecclesiastical authority to dominate demons. In addition, Catholicism supported a detailed and hierarchical vision of both heaven and hell. This was reflected in the rich artistic and literary tradition that described demons with specific characteristics, often grotesque, and assigned precise roles within a complex cosmology. Writers such as Dante Alighieri, in the Divine Comedy, offered vivid descriptions of the condemned souls and their demonic torments, reinforcing the Catholic narrative of the constant struggle between good and evil. In cons te, Protestantism emerged as a reaction to Catholicism in the 16th century, adopted a more simplified and direct vision of demonology. Reformers such as Martin Luther and Juan Calvino rejected many of the traditional rituals and beliefs that they considered superstitious, including much of the symbolism and the practice of exorcism as understood by the Catholic Church. For Protestants, the emphasis was in the individual faith and the authority of scriptures, which led to a demonology more focused on direct biblical interpretation. However, this did not mean that Protestantism denied the existence of demons. On the contrary, the Reformers believed that Satan was an active and dangerous presence in the world, constantly seeking to divert believers of the path of God. Luther, for example, spoke extensively about his spiritual struggles against the devil, describing him not only as an external adversary, but as an internal force that encouraged doubt and temptation. For Luther, the best weapon against demons was not a ritual, but an unwavering faith in the Word of God. Protestantism also adopted a different approach towards witchcraft and demonic possession. Although the Protestants shared with Catholics the fear of witches as Satan agents, the persecutions of witches in Protestant lands often focused more on social and moral aspects, reflecting a concern about community purity and the control of customs. In some cases, witch hunt was even more intense in the Protestant regions than in Catholics, as in the famous Salem judgments in colonial America. As for the narratives, Protestantism tended to strip the demonology of the elaborate stories and hierarchies that characterized the Catholic tradition. Instead, he focused on God's absolute power over all things, including demons. This perspective influenced the way in which demons were represented in Protestant literature, where they were often more abstract figures, symbolizing sin and human corruption rather than independent entities with their own personalities. Despite these differences, both traditions shared a common nucleus, belief in a cosmic battle between good and evil, where demons played a central role as opponents of the divine plan. Both Protestantism and Catholicism used the figure of the devil to reinforce their doctrines, either through the authority of the Church or the individual interpretation of the Scriptures. In art and popular culture, these differences were also reflected. While Catholicism continued to produce rich and detailed representations of demons in paintings, sculptures, and theatrical rituals, Protestantism opted for a more austere approach. Protestant sermons and texts often warned about the dangers of the images, arguing that they could distract the faithful from the true essence of faith. However, this did not prevent Protestant literature, such as John Bunyan's works or Puritan stories, exploring the issue of evil in deep and evocative ways. Demonology in Protestantism and Catholicism not only reflects theological differences, but also the social concerns and tensions of their respective times. In both cases, demons served as powerful symbols of the internal and external struggles of the human being, and his study reveals both the fears and hopes of the communities that invoked them. In religious art, angels and demons have been central figures that have inspired generations of artists to capture the eternal conflict between good and evil. From the first days of Christianity to the great works of the Renaissance and the Baroque, these entities have found their place in painting, sculpture, and architecture, serving as much as visual narrators of the Scriptures as vehicles to express the mystery, beauty and the terror of the divine and the infernal. In painting, Los Angeles were portrayed as symbols of purity and heavenly connection. During the Middle Ages, the artists attached to a hieratic style, in which angels were represented with rigid shapes, golden aura, and serene faces. The wings, a symbol of their spiritual nature, were frequently stylized and feathered, standing out against the golden funds that sought to evoke the sky. In this period, iconography focused on its roles as messengers, as on the innumerable representations of the announcement, where the Archangel Gabriel takes the good news to Mary. With the Renaissance, the representation of Los Angeles reached new heights. The influence of humanism and the rediscovery of classical ideals led artists to portray angels with more bodies as realistic and dynamic. Raphael, in her famous work The Virgin of San Sxto, created some of the most iconic angels of Western art, capturing in them a mixture of childhood innocence and celestial transcendence. Michelangelo, on the other hand, represented Los Angeles as muscular and heroic figures in works such as The Final Judgment in the Sistine Chapel, transmitting his power and his closeness to man. On the contrary, demons in painting often challenged beauty and symmetry standards. Represented as grotesque, deformed and terrifying beings, they served as visual warnings of the consequences of sin. In medieval art, demons were depraved cartoons of humanity, mixing animal characteristics such as horns, fangs, and claws with human bodies. This iconography sought not only to scare, but also reinforce the moral teaching of the Church, using fear as a pedagogical tool. During the Baroque, the artists brought these representations to a more dramatic level. The use of chiaroscuro, with its deep contrasts between light and shadow, was especially effective to portray the struggle between angels and demons. Caravaggio, with his realistic and theatrical style, used these contrasts to highlight the tension between the heavenly and the infernal, while artists like Rubens emphasized the dynamism and movement in their compositions, filling the heavens and the abysses with figures in perpetual struggle. In sculpture, angels and demons also found powerful forms of expression. In the Gothic cathedrals, the angels adorned the portals, the capitals, and the stained glass windows, raising the viewer's view towards the sky. The demons, on the other hand, hid in the gargoyles, grotesque figures that not only had a decorative function, but also practice, when channeling rainwater. These gargoyles, with their twisted expressions and their threatening positions, were visual reminders of the dangers of sin, stalking in the shadows of the sacred building. The mausoleums and funeral sculptures also integrated angels as guides of souls towards the hereafter. In these representations, the angels were solemn figures, often showing gestures of comfort and hope. The interaction between their expressions and the positions transmitted an emotional connection with the living, reaffirming faith in eternal life. Religious architecture, meanwhile, used the symbolism of angels and demons to structure the sacred space. The Gothic cathedrals, with their high vaults and arches pointed, sought to imitate the heavenly abode, filling them with stained glass windows that represented angels surrounded by divine light. These representations not only decorated, but also taught, acting as stone Bibles for a population mostly illiterate. Symbolism was also crucial in the spatial arrangement of architectural elements. For example, access to a church used to be flanked by images of the struggle between good and evil, with angels and demons in relief, creating a threshold between the earthly and the divine. In some churches, the fresh or mosaics of the final judgment decorated the vaults or the walls of the apses, reminding the faithful the final destination of their souls. In terms of iconography, angels and demons were used to transmit complex theological concepts. Los Angeles, with their wings, white robe and luminous faces, represented grace, purity and closeness to God. The demons, in contrast, were the incarnation of chaos and punishment, often associated with terrestrial elements such as fire, snakes and shadows. This clear contrast between them not only made visible the spiritual battle, but also served as an educational tool, reinforcing the religious lessons in each work. Religious art on angels and demons was not only a reflection of the beliefs of his time, but also an evangelization and persuasion tool. These images, loaded with symbolism and emotion, transcended their original purpose, leaving a lasting legacy that continues to fascinate those who contemplate them today. Literature has been one of the most powerful vehicles to explore the conflict between angels and demons, and few works have done it with the depth and scope of Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy and The Lost Paradise of John Milton. These two epics, separated by different centuries and cultural contexts, not only redefined how we understand good and evil, but also left an indelible impact on the perception of heaven, hell, and its inhabitants. In the Divine Comedy, Dante transports us to a spiritual journey that begins in hell, passes through purgatory and culminates in paradise. In the Inferno, demons occupy a prominent place, governing infernal circles with brutality and cruel order. Our creatures are not mere nightmare figures, they are manifestations of human sins, grotesque incarnations of corruption and eternal punishment. His presence not only underlines the nature of sin, but also the divine justice that orders it. Dante paints demons with almost anatomical precision. There are claws, tails, membranous wings and faces distorted by hatred and mockery. One of the most shocking moments of Inferno is Lucifer's description, caught in the ice of the ninth circle, a monumental being that cries silently while eternally chewing the traitors Judas, Gross and Casio. This portrait of Satan as a motionless and frozen figure, more victim than antagonist, is one of the most powerful and ambiguous images of Western literature. At the other extreme, Los Angeles appear in the Paradiso, bathed in light and perfection. Unlike demons, angels are not defined by their physicality, but by their immateriality and their proximity to God. Dante uses metaphors of light, music and movement to describe these entities, emphasizing their purity and their transcendent nature. Here, angels are not active characters, but symbols of grace and divine harmony, in marked contrast with the cacophony of hell. Centuries later, John Milton resumed the theme of the heavenly conflict in The Lost Paradise, an epic that recounts the fall of Lucifer, the rebellion of Los Angeles, and the expulsion of Adam and Eve of Eden. While Dante structured his work as a personal spiritual journey, Milton focused on the grandiosity of the cosmic battle between heaven and hell, offering a more political and psychological narrative. Milton transforms Satan into a figure of moral and rhetorical complexity. His Satan is not only a villain, but a charismatic leader, a rebel who questions God's authority. In his speeches, Satan combines the eloquence of a tragic hero with the manipulation of a demagogue, gaining the sympathy of the reader even when we know that his actions are destructive. The famous line, "It is better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven," encapsulates his challenging spirit and his tragic arrogance. Milton's hell, like Dante's, is a place of torment and despair, but also feverish activity. The fallen angels, now demons, build pandemonium, the infernal capital, in an act that reflects both their ingenuity and its desolation. This contrast between its lost greatness and its present degradation is one of the central tensions of the work, showing how ambition and pride can lead to self-destruction. On the other hand, Los Angeles to Milton, led by Miguel and Gabriel, represent the order and divine obedience. Although powerful, they lack the emotional complexity of Satan and his followers. This narrative imbalance is deliberate. Milton uses Satan as a warning against the dangers of individualism and rebellion, but cannot avoid imbuing him with a magnetism that eclipses Los Angeles. Both works share a fascination with the duality of angels and demons, but they do it from very different perspectives. Dante sees this conflict as a reflection of the travel of the human soul, while Milton addresses him as a political and philosophical struggle. However, both coincide in their ability to make these invisible worlds, filling them with vivid and emotional details that resonate with readers. The impact of these epics on literature and culture is incalculable. Dante and Milton not only expanded the theological imagination of their time, but also laid the foundations for generations of writers, artists, and theologians who continue to explore the complexities of angels and demons. Their visions of heaven and hell remain fundamental reference in the way we conceive good, evil, and eternal struggle between them. Music, with its ability to evoke deep emotions and transcend the earthly, has been a privileged means to represent the contrasting realities of heaven and hell. From the delicate harmony of heavenly to the dark and tumultuous sounds that evoke the demonic, composers throughout history have created sound landscapes that transport the listeners to these supernatural kingdoms. In representations of the heavenly, music is built on the idea of perfection and purity. The compositions that evoke angels are usually characterized by clarity, symmetry, and luminosity. The Gregorian song, with its austerity and its melodic simplicity, is one of the oldest examples of this approach. Human voices, singing in unison, seek to recreate the idea of the perfect communion with the divine, as if the angels themselves were present in the notes. During the Renaissance, polyphonic composers such as Palestrina and Josquin des Prez brought these ideas to the next level. His works, particularly masses and motets, are like sound architectures that raise the spirit. Palestrina, with his perfect counterpoint technique, composed pieces such as the Missa Papae Marcelli, where the voices are intertwined in a harmony that seems to flow from the eternal. Angelic music here is not only heard, but seems to wrap the listener, transporting it to a state of contemplation. The Baroque, with his love for theatricality, took a more dramatic turn to these representations. In works such as Handel's Messiah, heavenly choirs sing with greatness that seeks to convey divine glory. The famous Hallelujah is an explosion of joy that feels like an echo of the sky itself, with each voice and each instrument working in perfect harmony to create an almost overwhelming effect. On the other hand, the music that represents the demonic explores chaos, dissonance, and visceral. While heavenly melodies seek elevation, demonic seem to drag the listener towards the abyss. In medieval music, these representations were more subtle, often using minor modes or dissonant intervals to evoke a feeling of restlessness. Over time, demonic music became more explicit. In Romanticism, composers such as Franz Liszt and Hector Berlioz's hug the macabre and the fantastic to create works that capture the terror and fascination of the infernal. The macabre dance of Saint-Saëns, with its chilling use of the xylophone to imitate the sound of the bones, is an iconic example. Here, music not only illustrates, but invokes hell, allowing the listener to feel his heat and restlessness. A fundamental work in this regard is the Fantastic Symphony of Berlioz. In his fifth movement, Songe d'une nuit du sabbat, a night of Aquila, music becomes a frenzy of grotesque and caricaturesque sounds. Berlioz uses instrumental effects such as col legno, where musicians hit the ropes with the wood of the arch, to create an atmosphere of terror and mockery. It is as if the demons were celebrating an orgy of chaos. In the 20th century, composers such as Igor Stravinsky and Krzysztof Penderecki brought these representations even further. Works such as the consecration of Stravinsky's Spring challenged harmonic and rhythmic conventions, creating a primitive and wild sound that, although not directly demonic, evokes a destructive and uncontrolled force. Penderecki, in pieces like Threnody for the Victims of Hiroshima, used modern techniques to create sound landscapes of pure horror, which could well represent a contemporary hell. But heavenly and demonic music are not always opposite. In many works, these forces are intertwined, creating a dialogue that reflects the eternal struggle between good and evil. A shocking example is Verdi's Requiem, in particular the Dies Irae. In this movement, alternating music between apocalyptic terror and divine hope, with choral sections that seem to represent both angels and conflict demons. In the popular field, these ideas have also found their place. Rock and metal have embraced demoniac aesthetics with a particular intensity. Bands such as Black Sabbath or Iron Maiden have used aggressive sounds, dark letters, and an iconography full of infernal references to create an atmosphere that attracts and scares equally. On the other hand, heavenly choirs have been used in movie soundtracks since 2001, Odyssey of Space to The Lord of the Rings, to evoke the transcendental. The music of heaven and hell is a reflection of human duality, our ability to dream of the sublime and fear the unknown. Each note, each chord, and every silence is a bridge between the mundane and the eternal, reminding us that, although we are mortal, we carry echoes of the divine and the infernal. Cinema and television have proven to be a fertile terrain to explore the concepts of angels and demons, carrying these figures beyond the pages of sacred texts and mythologies towards the screen, where they come to life in impacting visual and narrative forms. The stories of heavenly battles, tragic falls, and distressing redemptions have captivated audiences around the world, mixing theological elements with fantasy, terror, and drama. One of the most iconic films in this context is The Exorcist, 1973, directed by William Friedkin. This masterpiece of horror film not only addresses demonic possession as a terrifying experience, but also highlights the spiritual struggle between good and evil. The exorcism scene, with Father Merrin facing the demon Pazuzu, captures the essence of human resistance against forces that seem unsurpassed. The film poses pregunters on faith, vulnerability, and the price of redemption, while immersing the viewer in an atmosphere full of visceral fear. On the other hand, Constantine, 2005, starring Keanu Reeves, offers a more modern and stylized perspective of the conflict between angels and demons. Based on Hellblazer's comics, the film presents a world where these entities walk among humans, manipulating events behind the scenes. Constantine, an exorcist and anti-hero cynical, becomes the bridge between these two worlds, facing infernal creatures while looking for their own redemption. The figure of Gabriel, played by Tilda Swinton, offers an ambiguous representation of the angelic, stressing that even heavenly messengers can be morally complex. The Supernatural series, 2005 to 2020, brought the narrative of angels and demons to a mass audience for 15 seasons. Throughout their development, the Winchester brothers face all kinds of supernatural threats, from minor demons to Lucifer himself. The introduction of Castiel, an angel guerrero who develops emotional ties with humans, marked a significant change in the way the series represent Los Angeles. The narrative deepened issues such as heavenly rebellion, free will, and the nature of faith, while mixing elements of action, horror, and humor. In classic cinema, Juana de Arco's Passion, 1928, directed by Carl Theodor Dreyer, although it does not directly address angels or demons, explores spiritual tensions and internal struggle between the divine and the diabolical in the context of faith. Through the heartbreaking interpretation of Maria Falconetti as Juana, the film suggests that the angelic voices that inspired the saint were also seen as madness or heresy, reflecting the duality inherent in spiritual experiences. The field of fantasy has also contributed work such as The Labyrinth of Faun, 2006, by Guillermo del Toro. Although he does not directly present angels and demons in the theological sense, his narrative is impregnated with symbolism. The figure of the faun and the creatures of the underground world could be interpreted as representations of the demonic or the celestial, depending on the perspective. The film explores innocence, sacrifice, and confrontation between tyranny and hope, topics deeply connected to the struggle between good and evil. Another notable example is Good Omens, 2019, an adaptation of Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman's novel. This series combines humor and theology to narrate the relationship between an angel, Aziraphale, and a demon, Crowley, who join forces to avoid apocalypse. Beyond the laughter, the series raises issues about humanity, friendship, and absurd bureaucracy of heaven and hell. Chemistry between its protagonists and its irreverent tone makes it a unique work within the genre. Animation cinema has also explored these issues with great efficacy. Fantasia, 1940, by Disney. Cinema and television have not only represented the struggle between angels and demons as an epic show, but have transformed these concepts into vehicles to explore universal issues, the power of sacrifice, the complexity of morality, and the eternal search for redemption. In doing so, they have taken these figures beyond their religious origin to a space where everyone, regardless of their faith or beliefs, can connect emotionally with them. The stories of miracles and angelic appearances have been a constant in the history of humanity, a mixture of the supernatural with the deeply human. These stories, transmitted from generation to generation or documented as personal testimonies, have infused hope in moments of despair and have reinforced belief in the presence of the divine in the earthly world. In sacred history, angels' appearances are monuments of faith. The Old Testament recounts how an angel stopped Abraham's hand when he was willing to sacrifice his son Isaac. The intervention was a clear gesture of divine compassion, a test that transformed the fate of entire generations. It is impossible not feel the weight of that scene, an anguished father, an innocent son, and a heavenly messenger who breaks to change everything. These types of stories face the idea that angels are not only emissaries of God, but also guardians of balance and mercy. In the New Testament, the angel Gabriel announces to Mary who will give birth to the Messiah, a moment of enormous spiritual significance. Gabriel is described as a radiant being, whose presence causes fear and astonishment, but also comforts with words of peace. This scene not only reflects the power of angels as carriers of great news, but also their ability to infuse courage in the midst of uncertainty. Over the centuries, angelic miracles have continued to be part of the human narrative. During the Middle Ages, numerous appearances of angels were reported in war and disease contexts. In the Battle of Monte Cassino in 1944, during World War II, some soldiers claimed to have seen light figures that guided them out of danger. Although it was never proven, the testimonies agreed to describe a feeling of peace and protection in the middle of the chaos of combat. In more recent times, the stories of angelic miracles have become less spectacular in appearance, but equally significant in impact. Many people report encounters with strangers who, in moments of extreme danger, rescue or warn them of an imminent threat, only to disappear mysteriously later. These figures are described as reassuring, with an almost supernatural energy that calms fear. For those who have lived these experiences, there is no doubt they were in the presence of an angel. A particularly moving example is that of natural disaster survivors. After the earthquake of Mexico in 1985, some bailouts were surrounded by stories of angels of the tremor, figures that supposedly guided rescue teams towards people trapped under the rubble. These stories, although impossible to verify scientifically, offer comfort to those who faced the tragedy and reinforce the idea that we are not alone, even in the darkest moments. Angelic apparitions have also found a place in everyday life. In hospitals and asylums, patients often narrate visions of bright figures in the moments close to death. These figures, according to them, do not speak, but transmit an indescribable calm, as if they announce that the suffering is about to end. These stories, known as visits in the deathbed, are considered by some as evidence that angels accompany souls in their transition to the hereafter. In contemporary testimonies, Los Angeles do not always occur with glowing wings or robes. Sometimes, they appear as common people, with a warm smile or an unexpected gesture of help. A woman who tells how a stranger stopped her damaged car in the middle of the night to offer her help, described the experience as an encounter with the divine. The man did not leave his name or be seen again, but left an indelible brand in his life. The connection between angelic miracles and human hope is undeniable. In a world full of uncertainty and suffering, these stories remind us that there are invisible forces, beyond our understanding, that work in favor of goodness and protection. The possibility that an angel can be watching us, ready to intervene in our moment of greatest need, is a thought that comforts even the most skeptical. The stories of miracles and angelic appearances, whether historical or contemporary, not only speak of divine action, but also of the deep human desire for connection and purpose. They leave us with a feeling of astonishment and humility, a spark of the eternal that illuminates our darkest days and inspires us to look for the good, the fair, and the sacred in our own world. Demoniac possessions and exorcisms have been issues that capture the collective imaginary with a mixture of fear and fascination. These stories, impregnated with horror and spirituality, show clashes between dark forces and divine power, with humanity trapped in the center of this struggle. Although many consider them legends or psychological manifestations, for others, they represent an undeniable reality that demands spiritual intervention. One of the most famous cases is that of Anneliese Michel, a young German whose suffering in the 1970s became a symbol of the complexities surrounding demonic possessions. Anneliese, raised in a deeply religious family, began to experience episodes of strange seizures and behaviors that doctors diagnosed as epilepsy. However, what followed was beyond the explainable: guttural voices, extreme aversion to sacred jitos, and a superhuman force that terrified those around her. His parents, convinced that it was not a physical illness, requested the help of the Catholic Church. The priests Ernstalt and Arnold Renz carried out multiple exorcism sessions, following the Roman ritual, in a desperate attempt to free Anneliese from what they described as a multiple possession. According to the records, names of demonic entities such as Lucifer, Judas Iscariot, and Cain were mentioned, suggesting a titanic struggle in the young woman's soul. His death in 1976, due to malnutrition and exhaustion, not only shook his family, but also initiated a global debate on the responsibility of religion against science. Another emblematic case is that of Roland Doe, the pseudonym of a young American whose alleged exorcism in the 1940s inspired the famous film El Exorcista. According to reports, Roland began experiencing strange phenomena after trying to communicate with his died aunt through an Ouija table. The objects moved alone at home, and his body showed inexplicable scratches that formed words. The family, terrified, went to the Catholic Church, and a group of priests carried out a prolonged exorcism. It is said that during the sessions, Roland spoke in unknown languages, threw violent insults, and demonstrated superhuman strength. The ritual ended with the expulsion of the entity, leaving the seemingly healthy and without memory of what happened. These cases, although shocking, are not the only ones. The story of Clara Germana Seal, a young South African of the 20th century, describes how she was possessed after making a pact with the devil. The records indicate that Clara developed the ability to speak languages she had never learned, such as Latin, German, and French, in addition to demonstrating a supernatural knowledge of the sins of those around her. Witnesses reported that their body floated in the air during exorcisms, a phenomenon that challenges all logic. The Catholic Church, historically, has played a crucial role in exorcisms, with protocols established to face these situations. The Roman ritual, updated in 1999 by the Vatican, is a set of sentences and practices aimed at expelling demonic entities. However, the Church also insists on a prudent approach, requiring that first medical and psychological explanations be ruled out before considering an exorcism. Father Gabriele Amorth, the main exorcist of the Diocese of Rome, said he made thousands of exorcisms throughout his life. In his memoirs, he described cases of people who vomited impossible objects, such as nails and glass fragments, and voices that came from human bodies with tones that did not correspond to human physiology. For Mirth, these manifestations were irrefutable evidence of the existence of the demonic, although it always emphasized the need for prayer and faith to face them. However, exorcisms are not exempt from controversy. Many medical and psychological organizations have pointed out that the symptoms of alleged possessions usually coincide with disorders such as schizophrenia, dissociative identity disorder, or psychotic episodes. In this sense, some exorcisms have ended in tragedies due to wrong interpretations of mental illnesses, such as Anneliese Michel. In the collective imaginary, demonic possessions and exorcisms have been immortalized in literature, cinema, and art. Works such as The Exorcist and The Rite show the drama and terror that these practices can evoke, while historical stories remind us that, for many people, these events are not fiction, but deeply real experiences. Either as an expression of faith or as a cultural phenomenon, the stories of possessions and exorcisms continue to fascinate and terrify in equal parts. The struggle between good and evil, as old as humanity itself, finds in these stories its most visceral and terrifying representation, leaving an indelible mark on those who cross the inexplicable. Evil, that spectrum that has tormented humanity since the dawn of time, has not always been seen as something external, embodied in demonic figures or supernatural entities. Many times, evil resides within us, in the depths of the human mind, where fears, frustrations, and hidden desires are intertwined to create our own internal demons. This psychological and philosophical vision invites us to look at not to heaven or hell, but towards our own being, facing what we often avoid recognizing. Modern psychology, from Freud to Jung, has offered fascinating interpretations of these internal demons. Sigmund Freud, with his model of the human psyche, described how conflicts between it, the self and the superego, could generate tensions that, if they were not managed, could lead to destructive behaviors. For Freud, evil was not an external entity that possessed us, but the result of repressed desires that emerged uncontrollably. Those primitive impulses, buried in the unconscious, could manifest themselves as behaviors that we were even unable to understand. Carl Gustav Jung, on the other hand, spoke of the dark side of the human psyche, which he called the shadow. According to Jung, we all carry aspects of our personality that we reject or fear: envy, anger, selfishness, hate. These features, when they are not recognized or integrated, can become our own demons, shaping our perception of the world and our actions in insidious ways. In his words, one does not illuminate imagining light figures, but making darkness aware. It is easy to point out the other as a carrier of evil. History is full of examples of how humanity has projected its own demons in people, groups, or ideologies. The Inquisition persecuted the so-called witches, while Nazism demonized entire communities, justifying unimaginable atrocities. These actions did not arise from an external demon, but from an internal abyss, fed by fear, hatred, and the need for control. Evil, in these cases, was not a supernatural entity, but a collective reflection of the individual shadows that were not faced. In a more everyday sense, our internal demons manifest themselves in ways that can be as destructive as invisible. Anxiety, depression, jealousy, and insecurities are part of this spectrum. Many people fight daily against internal voices that whisper them that they are not enough, that failure is inevitable, or that they are destined for suffering. These internal battles, even if they are not seen, can be as heartbreaking as any external confrontation. Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard described this fight as a form of despair. For him, the internal evil was not necessarily an active force, but the disconnection of our true self. Despair was the result of living a life that did not reflect our authenticity, feeding a void that, if it was not confronted, could consume us from within. The Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky explored this idea with a mastery in his novels, where the characters face moral dilemmas that lead them to confront their worst. In Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov becomes the stage of a battle between his desire to justify a murder as a superior act and his growing feeling of guilt. Here, the demon is not a being with horns, but the voice of his own consciousness, which torments him until he takes him to the limit of his sanity. But what does it mean to face these demons? How do we reconcile the darkest parts of ourselves with our search for goodness and meaning? The answer, according to many psychologists and philosophers, lies in self-knowledge and acceptance. Recognizing our shadow, our failures, and our darkest wishes does not make us less human, but more complete. Only when looking straight ahead we can start transforming it. The internal evil also teaches us important lessons about compassion, both towards ourselves and towards others. By accepting that we all carry invisible struggles, we are able to better understand the suffering of others, leaving aside judgments and prejudices. This empathy, although difficult to achieve, is one of the most powerful ways to resist the manifestations of evil, both inside and outside us. Ultimately, internal demons are not something that we can completely defeat, nor something we should demonize. They are an integral part of our human condition, reminding us that the struggle between good and evil is not fought on a celestial battlefield, but in the maze of our own mind. They challenge us to be brave, to face ourselves with honesty, and to seek balance in a world where light and darkness are inevitable companions. In the modern world, angels and demons have transcended traditional religious narratives to occupy a space in contemporary spirituality and the movement of the new era. These beliefs, far from being limited by dogmas, are mixed with personal ideas, psychological approaches, and a search for meaning in an increasingly disconnected world. Here, angels and demons are not only seen as supernatural figures, but as symbols of the opposite forces that influence our lives and decisions. In contemporary spirituality, angels are frequently perceived as personal and protective guides. They are attributed roles that go beyond the divine messenger's cough in Judeo Christian texts. They are spiritual allies, beings of light that offer comfort in moments of anguish and clarity in times of uncertainty. Many people claim to have felt the presence of an angel in critical situations, an internal voice that warned them of a danger, an inexplicable feeling of peace in the midst of chaos, or even the appearance of a luminous figure in dreams. This personal connection with Los Angeles has become popular in practices of the new era, where concepts such as guard angels are common. Believers claim that each individual has assigned one or more angels who watch over their well-being. These beings act as intermediaries between the divine and the human, offering guidance through signals such as repetitive numbers, feathers found in unexpected places, or even cloud patterns. For many, these signs are interpreted as reminders that they are not alone, that there are benevolent forces working in their favor. The demons, on the other hand, have found a more nuanced reinterpretation in this new spiritual era. Although some still see them as evil entities that seek to cause harm, many modern currents understand them as representations of our own fears, traumas, and shadows. Instead of fearing them, these practices invite you to face them and work with them as part of the personal healing process. For example, in transpersonal psychology, which combines elements of spirituality and modern psychology, the internal demons are seen as repressed aspects of ourselves that need to be recognized and integrated. This approach, which resonates with Carl Jung's ideas about the shadow, suggests that ignoring or rejecting these parts of our psyche only gives them more power. When facing them with compassion and curiosity, we can transform their negative influence into personal growth and understanding. In addition, rituals and practices related to angels and demons have evolved in this context. Guided meditations to connect with angels, visualizations to invoke their protective energy, and holistic therapies that combine crystals, aromatherapy, and positive statements have become popular among those who seek to balance their energy and find inner peace. These practices, although rooted in ancient traditions, are presented accessible to a global audience that seeks spirituality without the confines of institutionalized religion. In parallel, demons are explored through techniques such as regression therapy and hypnosis. These practices seek to identify the contracts that, according to some belief systems, the soul could have done with dark forces in past lives or in the unconscious plane. Free yourself from these influences, according to practitioners, helps unlock personal potential and overcome destructive patterns. The influence of angels and demons also extends to contemporary popular culture, where these beings are portrayed in forms that reflect both the anxieties and the desires of modern society. In television series, movies, and books, Los Angeles are shown as protectors who fight against evil, but also as complex figures, with emotions and internal conflicts that humanize them. Similarly, demons are usually represented as intriguing beings, often with a background that explains its fall or resistance to redeem. These stories, although fictional, reinforce the idea that good and evil are not always absolute, but nuances of the same reality. In this context, social networks and digital platforms have played an important role in disseminating these beliefs. Online groups and communities share personal experiences, photographs of angelic signals, and methods to connect with the spiritual world. This global exchange has allowed ideas about angels and demons to adapt and evolve, mixing with other cultural traditions and perspectives. However, not everyone sees these trends with good eyes. Critics argue that contemporary spirituality often dilutes the deep meaning of angels and demons, turning them into commercial products rather than sacred concepts. From letters of angels to expensive workshops on how to invoke them, some see in this popularization a departure from the authentic spiritual connection. Despite these criticisms, for many, angels and demons in modern spirituality represent something deeper: the eternal struggle between light and darkness within each human being, the need to find meaning in a complex world, and hope that, even in the darkest moments, there is always a force willing to guide and protect. The fascination with angels and demons has left a deep mark on popular culture, transforming them into central stories, personages ranging from books to video games. These modern narratives reimagine these entities, mixing mythological, religious and fantastic elements to capture the imagination of contemporary audiences. In this crucible creativity, angels and demons are not simply heavenly or infernal figures, they are symbols of internal conflicts, ethical dilemmas, and the eternal struggle between good and evil. In modern literature, few figures are as intriguing as fallen angels. Books like Hush, Becca Fitzpatrick Hush, or Cassandra Clare's Mechanical Angel explore the duality of these beings, facing their divine origin and earthly choices. These stories usually focus on angels that disobeyed heavenly laws, not always for evil, but for love, pride, or compassion for humanity. This approach humanizes fallen angels, presenting them as tragic figures trapped between two worlds. The demons, meanwhile, have evolved beyond their representation as absolute villains. In Good Omens of Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, for example, the demon Crowley is a sarcastic character, complex and, in many ways, more human than humans themselves. This reinterpretation shows that evil is not always inherent, but a matter of perspective, free will and context. Similarly, in novels such as The History of Lilith by Eduardo Galeano, demons represent marginal figures that challenge the established norms. Cinema and television have taken these stories to new audiences. Productions such as Supernatural and Lucifer have transformed the cultural landscape, showing angels and demons as multidimensional entities with internal conflicts as complex as those of humans. In Lucifer, the devil is not simply the prince of evil, but a being who seeks to redeem himself and understand his place in the universe. On the other hand, Supernatural explores the heavenly and demonic hierarchies through the constant struggle of the protagonists with beings of both sides, showing that good and evil can exist at all levels. In the world of video games, angels and demons have found fertile terrain to expand their mythologies. Games like Devil to Blizzard Entertainment build a universe where eternal war between heaven and hell is the nucleus of the narrative. The players are transported to a dark and chaotic world where angels are not always heroes and demons are not always villains, creating a rich and nuanced narrative experience. Other titles such as Bayonetta invest traditional papers. Here, Los Angeles appear as cruel and ruthless enemies, while the protagonist, a witch who fights them, is heroine. This investment of roles defies the traditional notions of morality and forces players to question the typical narratives of good against evil. Anime and manga have also embraced these figures, reinterpreting them for new generations. Works such as Neon Genesis Evangelion use Los Angeles as alien, incomprehensible and devastating entities, while others such as Non-Exorcist focus on the struggle of a young man against their own demonic origins. These stories, often loaded with symbolism and philosophical dilemmas, demonstrate how Oriental cultures have adopted and transformed these figures for their own narrative contexts. In the musical field, bands like Ghost have used demonic iconography to build provocative narratives in their albums and live presentations. Similarly, artists such as Florence and the Machine have addressed themes of spiritual struggle and redemption in songs that evoke the presence of celestial and dark forces. In these modern narratives, angels and demons not only represent external forces, they also embody the internal tensions we experience as human beings. They remind us that good and evil are not absolute concepts, but but exist in a gray spectrum that reflects our own ethical and emotional struggles. This constant reinvention in popular culture maintains the fascination with angels and demons alive, adapting them to the questions and concerns of each era. From epic stories to intimate reflections, these stories continue to challenge our ideas about power, morality, and meaning of human being. The final battle between angels and demons, which is described in the Book of Revelation, is one of the most powerful and terrifying images that have been transmitted throughout history. The Apocalypse, the latest book of the New Testament, not only recounts the end of the world, but also offers a deep vision of the cosmic struggle between good and evil, represented by the angels of God and the demonic forces led by Satan. This war is not just a contest to physics, but also a clash of wills, light against darkness, really against lie. The Apocalypse presents a final battle, the Armageddon, where the forces of heaven will face the infernal hosts in a conflict that will determine the eternal destiny of humanity. In this apocalyptic scenario, the dragon, Satan, is allied with the beasts of the sea and the earth, evil forces that rise against the kingdom of God. On the other side, Los Angeles fight under the direction of Jesus Christ, who, like the Lamb of God, acts as the leader of divine resistance. The battle described in Apocalypse is not only physical, but a spiritual confrontation of colossal proportions. Satan, the great adversary, is thrown into the abyss along with his followers. The demonic hosts, which for centuries have sown discord and suffering, are defeated by the absolute power of truth and divine justice. This cosmic shock symbolizes the resolution of conflicts that have plagued humanity since its early days, and marks the end of the era of sin and corruption. The Book of Apocalypse, written by the Apostle John on the island of Patmos, is loaded with symbols that represent the eternal struggle between good and evil. The figure of Satan, described as a red dragon, is the incarnation of evil, chaos and destruction. But the Apocalypse also presents the figure of the Lamb, which represents Jesus Christ, purity and divine truth, which has come to defeat evil once and for all. In the cosmic battle that Juan describes, the Lamb, who was sacrificed on the cross, emerges as the final winner. The symbolism of the dragon and the Lamb is central to the Apocalypse. The dragon represents evil in its purest form, the opposition to everything that is good, fair, and divine. The struggle between the dragon and the Lamb is not only a confrontation over time, but a timeless struggle that takes place in the hearts of men. Dragon followers are those who get carried away by selfishness, violence, and lies, while the followers of the Lamb represent those who seek redemption, peace, and truth, even at the expense of their own life. The culminating battle of the Apocalypse is not only a struggle for power, but a war for the eternal destiny of human souls. After the defeat of Satan and its hosts, the sky will be renewed and the earth will be purified, creating a new world where there will be no more suffering, no death, or crying. This vision of the kingdom of God is the horizon towards which humanity is directed, a kingdom of peace, justice, and eternal love, where angels not only protect, but also celebrate the victory of good over evil. The interpretations of the Apocalypse have varied over the centuries, from literal to symbolic readings. For some, the cosmic battle is a future event that will occur at the end of time, while for others, it is a symbolic representation of the constant struggle that each individual frees within himself between good and evil. Many theologians and philosophers have interpreted the Apocalypse as an allegory of the resistance of the human spirit against the destructive forces of the ego, sin, and darkness. The dragon and beasts represent the temptations and vices that stalk the human being, while the Lamb symbolizes the purity of the soul and salvation through faith. Throughout history, this vision of the final battle has been represented in art, literature, and music, deeply influencing Western culture. Paintings such as Miguel Angel's Final Judgment show the cosmic struggle between good and evil, while literary works such as John Milton's Lost Paradise also explore the themes of rebellion, fall, and redemption. In music, composers such as Johann Sebastian Bach and Karl Orff have used the theme of the final judgment in their works, evoking the final victory of divine justice over chaos and darkness. In contemporary cinema and television, the image of the final battle between angels and demons remains a recurring theme. Films such as The Seventh Seal of Ingmar Bergman and Prophecy explore the cosmic struggle between good and evil, while series as Supernatural have made this theme the nucleus of their narrative, showing a constant struggle between angels, demons, and dark forces in a terror and suspense scenario. The cosmic struggle in the Apocalypse is not only a story of the end of the world, but but a reflection on the constant struggle between the forces of light and darkness inside each human being. It is an invitation to choose from which side we will be, and to recognize that, although evil may seem unstoppable, in the end the truth and justice will prevail. The triumph of the Lamb over the dragon is the hope of a humanity redeemed, free of the tyranny of evil and eternal suffering. The Armageddon, that term so associated with the end of the world, has left an indelible mark on the collective imagination over the centuries. In its biblical context, especially in the Book of Apocalypse, the Armageddon is not simply the end of time, but the culmination of the cosmic struggle between good and evil. A conflict where angels and demons, forces of light and darkness, face in an apotheosic battle that will define the eternal destiny of humanity. But beyond sacred writing, the concept of Armageddon has evolved, adapting to the diverse cultures, religions, and, above all, to the contemporary perceptions of chaos and destruction. In its most literal interpretation, the Armageddon is the place where the last battle between the forces of God and those of Satan will be fought. The term comes from the Greek har Megiddo, which means Meadow Mountain, an old battle site in the Palestine region. According to the vision of the Apocalypse, this will be the location of the final confrontation, the place where demonic forces, led by the dragon, Satan, will rise against the army of angels under the command of Christ, who will come to the land as a judge. The image is fierce and solemn, the Lamb, the figure of salvation, facing total chaos, while the nations align, either under the flag of light or darkness. But the representation of the Armageddon, far from being a specific geographical event, has transcended religion, becoming a symbol of the universal struggle between good and evil, creation and destruction, order and chaos. Throughout the centuries, it has become a flexible concept that adapts its forms according to society's concerns. In the Middle Ages, the Armageddon looked like a prophecy of the end of the world that reflected the apocalyptic fears of plague, wars, and natural calamities. The fear of the final judgment was palpable, and the representations of the final battle of humanity against dark forces were impregnated with hopelessness and terror. In the modern era, Armageddon remains a recurring theme, but has taken new forms. In cinema, television, and literature, the image of the end of the world has been explored from different perspectives, from nuclear cataclysm to extraterrestrial invasions, through global pandemics or the collapse of civilization. In this sense, the Armageddon has secularized, and although religious references still persist, the idea of a final catastrophe is no longer exclusively linked to divine judgment, but also to the existential fears of the human being. Films like The Day After Tomorrow, 2012, Mad Max, or The Road present us visions of the Armageddon in which humanity faces its annihilation, either through natural disasters, war conflicts, or a total loss of the social order. These scenarios present the Armageddon not only as an end, but as an opportunity for reflection on the fragility of civilization and survival. In many of these stories, the characters must fight not only for physical survival, but also for the maintenance of their humanity in the midst of chaos. It is the end of civilization as we know it, but also the awakening of a new form of existence, in some cases, more primitive and brutal, in others, marked by hope and reconstruction. Literature, as always, has been a powerful vehicle to explore these ideas. In The Lord of the William Golding Flies, the fall of a group of children on a desert island reflects a vision of the miniature Armageddon, where order and civilization disintegrate to give way to barbarism. Similarly, on the Cormac McCarthy Road, the journey of a father and his son through a desolate world shows a fight not only for physical survival, but also for maintaining goodness and morality in a world where everything seems like have lost. The Armageddon, in these cases, is less on a final judgment of a divine entity, and more about the collapse of the social and moral order of humanity. In popular culture, speculations about the Armageddon go beyond the divine judgment and the battle between angels and demons. Some interpretations suggest that Armageddon is a process of transformation, not of total destruction, but of a purification of the world. In this vision, the end of the world is not a final catastrophe, but a stage of renewal, where old structures fall to give way to a new era. This speculation is found in currents of thought of the new era and in some contemporary spiritual movements, which see the Armageddon as the end of a cycle of suffering and corruption, and the beginning of a spiritual rebirth. Global. In other circles, the Armageddon is interpreted as a metaphor of the end of an era of ignorance or materialism. Here, the final battle does not take place on the physical battlefield, but in the field of human consciousness, in the struggle between spiritual knowledge and the forces that perpetuate selfishness, greed, and violence. It is the struggle for collective awakening, for inner transformation, and the step towards a new way of living in harmony with the universe. But the question persists, is the Armageddon simply speculation, a product of our fascination for the end of the world? Or is it an inevitable reality, a final destination from which we cannot escape? Armageddon's representations remain as diverse as the cultures that create them. Some see it as a warning that our actions can lead us to destruction, while others see it as an ancient myth whose relevance has lost strength in the modern world. The truth is that, while we continue to face global challenges such as climate change, war, pandemics, and poverty, the concept of Armageddon remains a powerful narrative tool. It forces us to confront our own vulnerabilities, our decisions, and our beliefs about the destiny of humanity. Ultimately, the Armageddon remains a mirror, not only of the end of the world, but also of the fears and aspirations that define our existence as human beings. The question of whether evil is necessary is, without a doubt, one of the deepest and most complex that has gone through the history of philosophy and theology. Humanity, throughout millennia, has tried to understand the nature of evil, its origin, and above all, if it has any purpose or if it is an accident in creation. In the Judeo Christian tradition, evil has generally been seen as the opposition to God and His will, but the question persists, is evil a need for free will and, therefore, for the very existence of good? From the first sacred writings, evil has been interpreted in various ways. In the Old Testament, evil is not created by God, who is considered the source of the absolute good, but is introduced as a consequence of the free will given to human beings. In the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, evil is presented as the option that the first humans choose by disobeying the divine order. God gives them the freedom to choose between good and evil, and it is precisely this ability to choose what allows love and loyalty to be genuine. Without the possibility of choosing evil, good would not make sense, it would be a mere imposition, not a freely achieved virtue. This argument, known as the theory of free will, argues that evil is an inevitable result of a universe in which creatures have the ability to make moral decisions. If there was no possibility to choose evil, goodness would lose its value. The free will, then, becomes a tool for human beings to have the ability to freely decide to follow the path of good. However, this freedom is not absolute. At the moment when man chooses evil, he separates from the divine will and, therefore, suffers the consequences of that choice. The notion that evil is necessary for the existence of good is found in many philosophical traditions. The Greek philosopher Plato, for example, believed that evil was a kind of absence of good, an imperfection in the order of the world. According to this vision, evil does not have an independent existence, but is the result of the lack of perfection in creatures and the world in general. In other words, evil would not be an active force by itself, but the shadow of good, the lack of what should be perfect. From this perspective, evil would be a transitory phenomenon and, ultimately, survey. On the other hand, figures such as Augustine de Hipona, one of the most influential theologians of the Christian tradition, offered a more complex interpretation. For Augustine, evil was not a substance in itself, but a deprivation of good, a non-existence. According to him, God, when creating the world, could not have created evil because he is absolutely good. Evil, therefore, would be the result of the free choice of rational creatures. Augustine understood that evil is necessary in the sense that human freedom implies the possibility of choosing evil, which in turn results in the possibility of good. In his vision, evil is a consequence of the free will given by God to human beings, and the suffering he causes has a redeeming purpose. Through pain and difficulties, human beings can reach divine grace and salvation. Of course, the idea that evil is necessary for free will poses a difficult question. If evil is an inevitable part of divine design, how can it reconcile with God's goodness and justice? In many theological traditions, this dilemma is known as the problem of evil. If God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenign, why does the existence of evil allow? If evil is present in the world, isn't that a contradiction with the nature of a perfectly good God? One of the most common responses to this dilemma is that evil, although real and present in the world, has a purpose that goes beyond human understanding. Evil and suffering, in this framework, are considered part of a broader divine plan, whose final purpose is the redemption of humanity. Suffering can be seen as an opportunity for spiritual growth, a means for souls to purify and approach divinity. In this sense, evil is not free, but has a transcendental purpose that is not always evident at the time of adversity. However, this explanation is still unsatisfactory for many. While it can be argued that evil has a redeeming purpose, the reality of human suffering is undeniable and, in many cases, unbearable. The existence of injustice, violence, poverty, and human pain seem to challenge the idea of a perfectly good divine plan. Some philosophers and theologians have proposed that, beyond the need for evil for free will or redemption, evil is a phenomenon that must be actively fought. Evil is not an inevitable part of existence, but a force that must be confronted and surpassed through human action, compassion, and the search for justice. Finally, there are those who argue that evil is ultimately an unfathomable mystery, something that goes beyond human understanding. In the Christian tradition, for example, it has been affirmed that suffering and evil are part of a great mystery that only God can fully understand. This position invites humility and acceptance that, although we cannot understand the purpose of evil, our responsibility is to face it with faith and love towards others, fighting for goodness in a world marked by darkness. In short, the reflection on the need for evil raises a fundamental paradox. Is evil a necessary condition for the existence of good, or is it simply a distortion of creation that must be overcome? Is it an inevitable consequence of free will, or a sign of a cosmic mismatch that we must correct? The answers to these questions are not easy, and may vary depending on the religious, philosophical, or personal perspective of each individual. However, what seems clear is that, regardless of its nature or necessity, evil is not something that we should passively accept, but a challenge that we must face with courage, compassion, and the tireless search for justice. In the depths of the Judeo Christian tradition, the fallen angels represent one of the most complex and at the same time fascinating stories. Beings of light and purity, created by God to be His closest messengers and servers, but who, for one reason or another, fell from their glory and surrendered to sin, giving rise to a cosmic rebellion that altered the structure of the universe itself. The fall of these heavenly beings raises an issue that has disturbed theologians, philosophers, and believers for centuries. Can fallen angels be redeemed? Is it possible for these beings, who have chosen to depart from good and follow dark paths, find forgiveness and return to divine grace? The concept of redemption in the context of fallen angels moves away from the traditional understanding of human redemption. In the case of humanity, redemption is associated with the sacrifice of Christ, who, through His death and resurrection, offers human beings the possibility of forgiveness and salvation. Humanity, despite its sins, has an opportunity for restoration, a chance to return to the path of good and reach communion with God. However, this principle of redemption is not extended in the same way to fallen angels. In most Judeo-Christian traditions, the angels who fell, headed by Lucifer, do not have the possibility of being redeemed. According to writings and theological interpretations, the sin of fallen angels is not the same as that of human beings. Human sin is linked to disobedience, but also to ignorance and weakness. Human beings are likely to err, to sin, due to their finite nature and their ability to learn and grow. On the contrary, angels, as spiritual beings, were created in a state of perfection and complete knowledge. At the time of their fall, they were not ignorant or vulnerable. When choosing to rebel against God, they made a conscious and definitive decision, sealing their destiny. The most prominent figure among fallen angels is Lucifer, whose name, in Latin, means our bearer of light. Lucifer was one of the most powerful archangels, but his pride and desire to be equal to God led him to challenge divine authority, unleashing a rebellion that resulted in his fall. In Christianity, this rebellion is interpreted as an act of irrevocable sin. For Lucifer and the other angels who followed him, there is no room for repentance, since his sin was a conscious rejection of divine perfection. Consequently, the fall of Lucifer and his followers is considered definitive, without the possibility of return to the grace of God. In medieval literature and in the theological visions of the first centuries, an interpretation that reinforced this idea was developed. The fallen angels, who became demons, had not only committed a sin, but had freely chosen evil, challenging the divine will in an irreparable way. This lack of repentance and his reluctance to return to God meant that his conviction was eternal. The image of hell, with Lucifer and the other tormented demons and separated from the divine light, became the final destination of the fallen angels, without hope of salvation. In the Book of Enoch, one of the most influential apocryphal texts in Judeo Christian literature, the fallen angels are described, called guards, as those who descended to the earth to teach the prohibited secret humans, such as magic and hidden knowledge. These angels, getting involved with human women and teaching them forbidden arts, were punished by God. Although some of the vigilantes expressed repentance, their destiny was already sealed. They were chained in a deep abyss, far from the light of God, and their conviction was established as an example of the severity of angelic sin. However, in theological reflection, difficult questions always arise. If the angels were created by God as perfect and free beings, why would they not have the ability to repent? What does it mean for a spiritual, pure and eternal being, the concept of repentance? While humanity is marked by its finite and susceptible nature of growth, angels seem to be beyond this transformation process. The concept of redemption in fallen angels, then, becomes a matter of whether these beings, who lived in God and witnessed their glory, can really fall so deeply into the evil that there is no going back. In the Christian scriptures, one of the most relevant passages that refers to this issue is in the Gospel of Matthew 25:41, where it is mentioned that demons were created for the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. This passage reinforces the idea that fallen angels have no hope of redemption. Lucifer's fate and his followers is eternal conviction, and his rebellion is irrevocable. However, Catholic theology, in particular, also offers a vision of the struggle between good and evil, in which it is recognized that evil is real and that the forces of evil are powerful, but in the end, it is argued that God's victory is absolute and definitive. As for the representations of the fall and condemnation of fallen angels, religious and mystical literature often plays a key role in the elaboration of their destinations. In works such as The Lost Paradise of John Milton, the figure of Lucifer, although condemned to hell, is presented with a humanity that reflects his internal struggle. Milton, however, does not offer an escape for Lucifer, since the rebellion and pride have taken him to a point of no return. The condemnation of fallen angels becomes, then, not only an act of punishment, but a teaching on the nature of evil and the price of disobedience. Finally, the idea that fallen angels cannot be redeemed poses difficult questions for believers who see God's mercy as infinite. If God offers forgiveness and redemption to human beings, why angels, with their superior nature, cannot have the same chance? The answer seems to be in the depth of sin of fallen angels, whose rebellion was a total and conscious rejection of divine goodness and perfection. The evil they chose was not a passing error, but a definitive decision, which does not admit repentance. Therefore, the fallen angels and their redemption, or the lack of it, remain a mystery in the Judeo-Christian tradition. The nature of evil, freedom and condemnation of spiritual beings remain as an enigma, inviting reflection on divine justice, eternal destiny and the inevitability of the elections we make in our lives. In the vast scenario of the universe, where the forces of good and evil constantly face, humanity is in a unique position. Human beings, creatures created with free will, are witnesses and, in many cases, main actors in the cosmic battle between angels and demons. Although angels and demons have existed long before humans take shape, the role of humanity in this celestial war has become crucial. Not only are we observers, but our will and our decisions can tip the balance between good and evil, thus affecting the course of that eternal war. From the first writings to modern visions, the relationship between humanity and the celestial and demonic entities has been a recurring theme. In the Old Testament, humans were created to have dominance over the earth, but they were also given the ability to choose between good and evil. This freedom, according to religious traditions, is the key that connects humans with the heavenly battle. In the story of Adam and Eve, the first sin committed by humanity was not only an act of disobedience, but also an openness to the forces of evil that existed in the cosmos, represented in this case by the snake, a manifestation of Satan. By yielding to temptation, humanity not only moved away from God, but allowed dark forces to gain ground on earth. The connection between humans and angels is also revealed intrinsically through the figure of the protective angel. In many cultures, people have believed in the presence of guardian angels, heavenly beings that ensure the protection and well-being of humans, guiding them in times of need. This close relationship between humans and angels highlights the role of the former as cooperators of the divine plan. According to the scriptures, Los Angeles are not only in charge of transmitting God's messages, but also act as guardians of God's people, fighting demonic forces seeking to corrupt humanity. But humanity is not just a passive observer in this war. In fact, the participation of humans in the heavenly battle is active, since, through our decisions and behaviors, we can be instruments of good or evil. In many religions and mythologies, the fate of humanity is intrinsically linked to cosmic struggle. The acts of goodness, generosity, and justice are seen as an extension of the celestial kingdom, while selfish, malicious, and destructive actions are seen as a way of feeding the forces of evil. By doing good, humans strengthen heavenly hosts and weaken demons. When choosing evil, they cause an internal and cosmic war that perpetuates the struggle between angels and demons. The demons, in turn, are present in human life as tempting, trying to deviate from the straight way. Throughout history, the devil and his henchmen have been represented as forces acting on human souls, seeking corrupts and separating them from good. Temptation is not only a matter of offering temporary pleasures, but from moving people away from their connection with the divine. In the Gospel of Matthew, 4:1-11, Satan tempts Jesus in the desert, and the narrative reflects how demons try to gain power over humans through deception and manipulation. This interaction between humans and demons highlights how our decisions can be influenced by these dark forces, and how temptation resistance is fundamental in spiritual struggle. However, the role of humanity in heavenly war is not simply a matter of being liabilities or active in the struggle between good and evil. Humans, due to their free will, have the ability to participate directly in God's strategy to defeat evil forces. In the Christian tradition, prayer is seen as one of the most powerful weapons against demons. Christians believe that, through prayer and faith, they can invoke the help of God and angels to overcome the temptations of evil. Prayer, especially exorcism prayers, is believed to have the power to repel demons and purify souls. This practice not only reflects the intervention of heavenly beings in human life, but also indicates how humans are an active part in the cosmic struggle. On the other hand, many believe that heavenly war is not only an external, but internal battle. The most important struggle occurs within the human heart and mind. Evil is not always manifested in great events or external demonic interventions, but also in the daily decisions we make, in our thoughts, in our morality, how we treat the other's ace. Christianity and other religions teach that demons seek to corrupt our essence, invading our thoughts and actions, while angels struggle to keep us in the path of light and truth. This internal struggle, which is often described as a battle between flesh and spirit, is also a fundamental facet of human role in heavenly war. The vision of the apocalypse, as presented in the Book of Apocalypse, also underlines the relationship between humans and celestial and demonic beings in the context of the cosmic war. In the text, a final battle is described among the forces of good, led by the Lamb, Jesus Christ, and the forces of evil, led by the beast, Satan. During this time, it is said that humans will play a crucial role in the defeat of evil, by joining the heavenly army in the fight against evil. The chosen of God, those who have resisted the temptations of evil and remained faithful, will be the victors in this final battle. In this way, the fate of humanity and its fight against the forces of evil is seen as an integral part of the final outcome of the heavenly war. Humanity, then, has a central role in the celestial war, which is not limited only to being the battlefield between angels and demons, but also acts as active agents in the cosmic conflict. Human freedom to choose between good and evil, and the consequences of these choices, are in the heart of this eternal battle. While angels fight in the name of God and demons seek to corrupt and destroy, human beings are in a position in which they can tip the balance in favor of light or shadows, depending on the decisions they make every day. This struggle not only develops in the heavenly heights, but is fought in the heart and mind of each human being. The legacy of the angels and demons, those ethereal and terrifying figures that have accompanied us over the centuries, has left an indelible brand in history, religion, and culture. Through the times, these supernatural entities have been much more than mere elements of spiritual beliefs. They have deeply influenced the way we understand good and evil, fate and freedom, the sacred and the profane. From sacred texts to artistic expressions, through popular legends, the impact of angels and demons is universal, transforming not only religious ideas, but also human values and perceptions. The concept of angels and demons has played a crucial role in the formation of great monotheistic religions, especially in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. In these religions, angels are considered as messengers of God, heavenly beings that serve as intermediaries between the divine and the human. They are symbols of purity and obedience, sent to guide, protect, and transmit the words of God. The demons, on the other hand, represent the forces of evil, chaos, temptation, and rebellion, constantly challenging the will of God and seeking to corrupt humanity. These opposites have served as clear examples of the consequences of moral and spiritual elections, directly influencing religious doctrine about sin, salvation, and final judgment. Throughout history, the stories of angels and demons have intertwined with the human understanding of destiny and morality. From the first biblical writings to apocalyptic visions, stories about angels and demons have been used as warnings about eternal struggle between good and evil, and about the consequences of disobeying the divine. The figure of Satan, in particular, has been central in the creation of a narrative about the fall of man and the condemnation of eternal suffering. The stories of the fallen angels, such as Lucifer, offer a deep reflection on pride, rebellion, and the inevitable fall from the one who moves away from divine truth. These stories have served as the basis for the doctrines of the final judgment, hell, and salvation, teaching moral lessons that still resonate in modern society. In the cultural field, the legacy of Los Angeles and demons has left a deep mark on literature, art, and cinema. The figure of the angel has been represented in innumerable artistic works, from the Renaissance frescoes of Michelangelo to the modern paintings of contemporary artists. The angels have been portrayed as beings of light and beauty, symbols of hope, peace, and salvation. These portraits of the divine have influenced the way people visualize the spiritual world, seeking comfort and guide in the representation of beings that rise above earthly problems. However, demons have had a presence equally strong, but in a much darker tone. Throughout art history, demons have been represented as horrible, deformed, and monstrous beings, personifying evil in all its forms. From the dark figures of Dante Alighieri in the Divine Comedy to the grotesque figures of the Middle Ages, demons have served as the symbol of the deepest human fears, suffering, sin, eternal punishment. These artistic representations not only serve as warnings, but also as explorations of the human soul, trying to understand the darkest aspects of existence and what it means to be human. In literature, angels and demons have been fundamental to explore the internal struggle of the characters, temptation, and sacrifice. Works such as John Milton's Lost Paradise have represented the fall of Lucifer and his rebellion against God, while modern authors have continued to explore the eternal struggle between good and evil, often representing angels and demons as figures that reflect the human struggles with sin, desire, and redemption. The influence of these stories is so deep that even contemporary novels and comics continue to use angels and demons as essential elements for their narratives. The cinema, since its early days, has explored these issues through the representation of angels and demons in stories of horror, fantasy, and action. Films such as The Exorcist have presented evil in its most terrifying form, with demons possessing human bodies and challenging the laws of nature. Through cinema, demons have become symbols of chaos and danger, while angels continue to represent the struggle for order, light, and salvation. The contrast between angels and demons in popular culture often reflects contemporary concerns about evil, justice, and redemption, playing sensitive fibers of spectators by presenting a cosmic struggle that is not only exterior, but also interior. The impact of angels and demons has also transcended religious and cultural borders, influencing popular beliefs and oral traditions. In many cultures, angels are considered as benevolent beings involved in everyday life, bringing good omens or protecting people from adversities. The demons, on the other hand, are seen as agents of evil that manipulate the circumstances and hearts of humans, bringing them to perdition. These stories have served as a basis for a vast number of myths, legends, and superstitions, which are still alive today, especially in folklore and traditions of many cultures around the world. However, the legacy of angels and demons is not limited only to religion and culture. These figures have also influenced philosophy, especially in issues related to free will, fate, and the nature of evil. The confrontation between good and evil, symbolized by angels and demons, has been a central theme in philosophical reflection, especially when it comes to questions about the existence of evil in the world and human responsibility in their fight against the dark forces. Theologians have discussed for centuries if evil is a necessary part of creation, a product of free will, or if it is simply a corruption of what is originally good. In summary, the legacy of angels and demons has been a fundamental element in the configuration of human history. These figures have influenced not only religious and philosophical doctrines, but also in art, literature, cinema, and popular beliefs. Through them, we have learned about the struggle between good and evil, about fate and freedom, about light and shadows. And, perhaps the most important thing, through them we have begun to understand what it means to be human, with all our imperfections, desires, and moral elections. Throughout history, demons have been interpreted as manifestations of evil, supernatural beings that inhabit the space between the celestial and the earthly, with the ability to possess, corrupt, and cause chaos in the human world. However, as scientific knowledge has advanced, many of the beliefs that were previously considered absolute have been questioned, and the supernatural has begun to be examined from a more rational and empirical perspective. Today, science and philosophy offer us alternative explanations for phenomena that, in past centuries, would have been considered the work of demons. One of the first scientific approaches to the concept of demons comes from the study of mental illnesses. In ancient times, when human beings did not have the knowledge learned about psychology, the people who suffered from serious mental disorders, such as schizophrenia, epilepsy, or personality disorder, were often seen as possessed by demons. The symptoms of these diseases, which included hallucinations, seizures, and behavioral alterations, were interpreted as signs that an evil being had taken control of the body of the affected person. In the Middle Ages, the belief in demonic possession was so prevalent that the Catholic Church organized exorcisms as part of the rituals to free people from malignant influences. However, over time, scientific research has thrown a different light on these phenomena. The pioneering work of doctors and psychiatrists has revealed that what was previously considered demonic possession were actually manifestations of mental disorders. For example, schizophrenia, which is characterized by delusions and hallucinations, may have been interpreted as a demonic intervention signal in ancient times. Today, this disease is understood as a neurological disorder that affects the perception of reality, and is treated with medication and psychological therapy. The advance in the understanding of neurological disorders has also resulted in new interpretations of what was previously considered demonic influence. For example, epileptic seizures, which cause loss of body control and episodes of unconsciousness, were associated in the past with the possession by demons. However, modern neurology has identified epilepsy as a brain condition that affects the electrical activity of the brain, which can explain these episodes scientifically, eliminating the need to resort to supernatural explanations. Science has also addressed experiences related to the spiritual world from a more empirical perspective. Many people in different parts of the world have reported encounters with non-human beings, such as ghosts, spirits, or demons, during moments of emotional crisis, stress, or isolation. These stories have been subject to scientific studies seeking to find psychological and physiological explanations. It has been shown that certain states of mental anguish can induce sensations of presence or visions of supernatural entities. These phenomena, known as extracorporeal experiences, or perceptions of entities, can be attributed to the alteration of brain functions, often caused by extreme stress, sleep deprivation, or consumption of psychoactive substances. Neuroscience has identified areas of the brain related to spiritual and paranormal experiences. The stimulation of certain points in the brain, such as the temporal lobe, has been linked to the appearance of visions and the feeling of being in contact with the beyond. This type of discoveries has led some scientists to argue that the experiences of contact with demons and other supernatural beings are actually phenomena of the human brain, stimulated by physical and emotional factors. From this perspective, demons would be nothing more than projections of the human mind, built from fears, beliefs, and personal traumas. In the philosophical field, the concept of demons has been used to reflect on the nature of evil, human freedom, and morality. Philosophers such as René Descartes and Friedrich Nietzsche have explored the ideas of the existence of evil forces or supernatural influences, although their interpretations are more metaphorical than literal. Descartes, in his famous Meditation on the First Philosophy, introduced the idea of the evil demon, a being that deceives the individual, making him doubt about reality and his own knowledge. This demon should not be understood as a supernatural being, but as a metaphor to explore the limitations of human knowledge and certainty. Descartes used this figure as a tool to question the perception of reality and reliability of the senses. Nietzsche, on the other hand, approached evil from a more philosophical perspective, criticizing the idea that the forces of evil exist objectively in the world. For him, Christian morality, which is often associated with the fight against demons, was a form of oppression that denied human vitality and freedom. Nietzsche saw evil not as an external that must be defeated, but as a social construction that is used to submit individuals. In this sense, demons are symbolic representations of the repressed and feared aspects of humanity. Finally, the philosopher and sociologist Michel Foucault also stated that the concept of the demonic has been used by power institutions, such as the church and the state, to control society. In his work Monitoring and Punishing, Foucault argues that representations of evil, including those of demons, are used to mark those who do not conform to social norms. By labeling certain individuals as possessed or malevolent, institutions have justified their marginalization or punishment, creating a distinction between the good and bad of society. Thus, from the scientific and philosophical perspective, demons cease to simply be supernatural figures to become symbols and projections of human experiences. Science and philosophy invite us to see demons not as external entities, but as constructions of the mind, culture, and social beliefs. Instead of interpreting the supernatural as an objective reality, modern studies teach us to examine the phenomena of possession and evil through the lenses of psychology, neuroscience, and philosophy, challenging our perceptions and opening new doors to understand the complex nature of the human condition. In a world marked by rapid social, technological, and cultural changes, the influence of angels and demons on contemporary morality remains deep, although perhaps in a more subtle way than in past times. The celestial and demonic figures, although often relegated to the pages of the sacred books and legends, continue to be powerful symbols of the concepts of good and bad, morality and corruption, which guide our ethical and social decisions. The relevance of these superhuman beings in today's people. First, Los Angeles are still representations of good, light, and hope, values deeply longed for in a world full of uncertainties. In a global context where ethical challenges and humanitarian crises are increasing, the figure of the angel as a protector and guide becomes a comforting symbol of the intrinsic goodness of humanity. Although many people no longer believe in angels literally, the qualities attributed to these entities remain idealized. The values of compassion, generosity, and sacrifice continue to be universal, and many find in them a way of aspiring to be better human beings. The stories about angels help to strengthen the idea that there is something beyond the physical, something bigger than us, who watches over our well-being and drives us to do good, even in dark times. On the other hand, demons, symbols of evil, temptation, and destruction, remain powerful figures in reflection on evil in the modern world. Although today most people no longer see demons as literal entities that have bodies or cause supernatural disasters, the concept of evil remains relevant. In an era in which morality looks like a more fluid spectrum, where the lines between the good and the bad are often blurred, demons continue to represent the attraction for the destructive, the selfish, and the immoral. The fight against corruption, greed, violence, and selfishness, which are seen as demonic in a figurative sense, is one of the most important ethical struggles of our contemporary society. However, contemporary morality, influenced by secularism and ethical relativism, faces challenges when applying these traditional concepts of good and evil. In an increasingly pluralistic world, with a diversity of beliefs and values, the notion that angels represent the absolute good and demons the absolute evil has been eroded. Morality is no longer perceived as a clear battle between heavenly and demonic forces, but as a space of constant negotiation between the interests, desires, and values of different groups and cultures. In this context, evil is no longer defined in religious terms, but also through concepts such as social injustice, economic inequality, and political oppression. The notion of angels and demons in contemporary morality is also reflected in how we see internal struggles and personal ethical dilemmas. Today, many people face what we could call internal demons, those voices in their heads that foster doubt, despair, and bad decisions. the demons have become, in a way, a metaphorical representation of the psychological battles that we deliver with ourselves, of the fears and desires that drag us towards destructive behaviors. In this sense, the angels represent not only the external goodness, but also the inner voice of consciousness, that which urges us to do what the course straight, to seek common well-being and make ethical decisions, even when the temptation of selfishness or revenge is strong. In addition, in modern popular culture, angels and demons continue to play a central role in moral reflection, although more complex and nuanced. In contemporary films, series, and books, angels and demons are not always presented as simple symbols of good and bad. Often, they are given depth and humanity, showing their dilemmas, their doubts, and their struggles. These angelic and demonic characters become metaphors of the difficult decisions that we all face in life: choose between personal sacrifice for a greater good or yield to immediate and selfish desires. The most modern representations of angels and demons show that the lines between the good and the bad are not so clear, and that moral decisions are often plagued by ambiguity. For example, in many contemporary stories, demons are presented not only as forces of evil, but as beings with a complex story, motivated by reasons that go beyond pure evil. Similarly, angels are not always infallible, and sometimes they are vulnerable, with their own doubts and contradictions. This humanization of the divine and the diabolical reflects a society that has gone from seeing morality as something absolute and fixed, to see it as something relative and conditioned by specific contexts. This approach allows greater empathy for the figures that would have previously seen how simply good or bad, challenging the audience to question their own beliefs about good, evil, and justice. Contemporary ethics has also reconfigured the role of angels and demons in relation to human responsibility. Instead of focusing only on an external struggle, in which human beings fight against supernatural forces, today emphasis is placed on human capacity to do good and evil by their own choice. Angels and demons, in this sense, represent not so much a cosmic struggle in the outside world, but the internal forces that drive us towards virtue or vice. Modern demons are not always supernatural beings, but institutions, systems of power and social structures that perpetuate in an increasingly interconnected world. Individual and collective decisions have global repercussions, and the symbolic figures of angels and demons remind us that, in the end, it is we who must assume the responsibility of our actions, and the consequences that of them derive. Throughout the centuries, the stories of angels and demons have been told, recalled, and reinterpreted by generations. However, among the best-known narratives, there are innumerable less explored stories, which show a different and more complex vision of the divine and the evil. These unpublished myths and less-known cases reveal facets of the angels and demons that do not always fit the traditional ideas of good and evil, and challenge us to reconsider our understanding of the supernatural. One of those forgotten stories comes from ancient Greece, where the concept of angels and demons was very different from the Judeo Christian. The daemons, intermediate beings between the gods and humans, were neither completely or completely bad. Often, they were seen as spiritual guides or forces of nature, but they could also be carriers of chaos and destruction. In the story of Phaeton, the son of Helios, the god of the sun, a daemon called Mene plays a crucial role in the tragedy. Mene, being unable to control the solar steed, becomes the catalyst of the fall of Phaeton, who, when trying to drive the car of the sun, causes the destruction of the earth. This story shows us the daemons not only as beings that guide, but as forces that can alter the course of human destinations, a complex representation of what we could call destiny instead of a simple struggle between good and evil. Another little-known myth comes from Jewish tradition, particularly from apocryphal texts. In the Book of the Jubilees, an enigmatic figure known as Azazel, who plays a crucial role in the development of evil in the world, is mentioned. Azazel is described as a fallen angel, but his story is deeper and more gloomy than Lucifer's. In some stories, Azazel is in charge Gado to teach humanity the art of war and the manufacture of weapons, a knowledge that, in wrong hands, triggered suffering and violence on Earth. However, Azazel is not presented simply as the evil one, but as a tragic figure that, by teaching humans, also contributed to their own fall and the perdition of humanity. This story questions the traditional dichotomy between good and evil, showing how the actions of a heavenly being can have both destructive and educational consequences. In the mythologies of Nordic cultures, there are less known stories about the conflict between angels and demons. In these stories, the As war gods, which are often associated with angels in Judeo Christian traditions, fight against the Jotna, the giants of chaos, who oppose the divine order. However, there are ambiguous figures in these narratives that are neither completely or bad. One of these beings is Loki, the trickster god, whose relationship with the gods is conflictive, but often serves to balance the forces of the universe. Loki, in his role as destroyer and creator, is often presented as a demonic figure, but also as a being that plays a necessary role in maintaining cosmic balance. It is interesting how this vision of Loki as an intermediate figure between good and evil reflects the complexity of the forces of the universe, where chaos and order are intrinsically connected. Another less-known myth comes from Islamic traditions. In the Quran, the history of Iblis, the equivalent of Satan, is related to a uniqueness that distinguishes it from the Judeo Christian narratives. According to the Quran, Iblis is not a fallen angel, but a jinn, a creature made of fire that refuses to prostrate Adam, the first human being, when God orders it. Instead of being an angel who betrays God, Iblis is an autonomous being with his own will, who chooses to challenge God due to his pride. This act of disobedience, although tragic, does not immediately make it a symbol of evil, but a being whose rebellion reflects the complex relationship between free will and divine obedience. This story presents a completely different angle about the concept of Satan, one that emphasizes the dignity of the free will and the tension that arises between the human being and the divine. In the medieval Christian tradition, the role of angels and demons is also nuanced by little-known stories. During the Middle Ages, the stories of angels involved in the life of mortals were popularized, but not always as messengers of light. In some medieval texts, such as the Libra de Angelis de Pierre de Blois, it describes how some angels appear before human beings in a terrifying way, seeking to prove their faith or even punishing human arrogance. In these stories, angels are not omnibeneficent beings, but entities that operate on the border between the divine and the terrible, challenging the perceptions of the sacred as a refuge of absolute goodness. This more complex image of angels as ambivalent figures remind us that the divine can be as imposing and fearsome as the demonic. In more recent times, there have been several modern stories that explore unpublished myths about angels and demons. In the 19th century, the British philosopher and writer Arthur Machen wrote several stories in which the supernatural fuses with the everyday in a disturbing way. In his work The Great God Pan, Machen tells how a supernatural being, beyond human understanding, manifests itself through a series of baffling events, involving both angels and demons in his background. In these stories, the intervention of heavenly and demonic beings is always ambiguous, leaving the reader with the feeling that the line between the divine and the evil is much more blurred than it has traditionally been believed. In contemporary popular culture, the narrative of Los Angeles and demons has evolved, presenting itself in new and unexplored ways. Recent films and series, such as Constantine or Supernatural, introduce angels and demons with stories that challenge traditional understanding. In these stories, angels and demons are not simply agents of morality, but beings with their own agendas, fighting for the control of human destiny. These modern stories suggest that good and evil are fluid concepts, depending on the point of view of each character, which reflects a more contemporary and pluralistic perspective about morality and supernatural. These unpublished stories and unknown myths invite us to question the traditional narratives of angels and demons, showing us that there are no simple answers about the divine and the evil. Through these stories, a space to explore the ambiguity opens moral internal struggles, and the complexity of the supernatural, challenging our perceptions about good, evil, and struggle between these two poles. We live in an era in which the old stories of angels and demons, those traditional archetypes that have dominated the religious, mythological, and cultural narrative for centuries, feel more and more distant and incomplete to understand the complex ethical and spiritual dilemmas that we face today. The world has changed, beliefs have evolved, and, nevertheless, the fundamental questions about good, evil, morality, and destiny continue to stalk human minds. Is it possible to look at the ancient stories of angels and demons from a new perspective, more relevant to the contemporary world? How can we reinterpret those ancient concepts to find answers to the uncertainties and struggles of our time? Instead of clinging to a Manichaean and binary vision, in which good and evil are absolute and separate forces, a modern interpretation could suggest that both angels and demons represent deeply symbolic aspects of human nature. Instead of seeing them as ourselves, we could consider angels as manifestations of our noblest aspirations: compassion, generosity, love and altruism. In this sense, the angels are not only figures from another world that descend to guide us, but symbols of our best qualities, those that we sometimes feel that they are out of our reach, but that, with effort and consciousness, we can cultivate. The demons, on the other hand, could cease to be seen only as malevolent and destructive forces from a cosmic plane, and begin to be understood as representations of our internal shadows, those selfish, destructive impulses that we all house within us. The demons are not only external temptations that lead us to sin, but manifestations of our own fears, dark desires, and unresolved suffering. It is in the internal struggle between our higher aspirations, angels, and our lowest inclinations, demons, where the true moral battle resides, that which defines our decisions, relationships, and the way we face the world. Instead of seeing the struggle between angels and demons as a divine confrontation in which the forces of evil oppose absolute good, we could conceptualize it as an internal war within each of us. It is a battle for the control of our consciousness, in which evil is not always what it seems. Perhaps, evil is not an external and universal force, but something that manifests itself in everyday decisions, in the way we treat others, how we decided to live our lives. In this way, evil is not something alien to us, but something that must be understood and, if necessary, surpassed from within. In an interconnected, diverse, and multicultural world, the ancient definitions of the divine and the demonic no longer serve us as easily as they did in past times. Contemporary morality has become more fluid, more negotiated, and is being constantly redefined by our interactions, by social conflicts, by science and technology, for the struggles for justice and for everyone's well-being. Questions about good and evil, about angels and demons, can no longer be resolved with easy or simplistic responses. In this sense, a symbolic and modern approach of good and evil can help us give them a new purpose, one that is more useful and understandable in the current context. This approach does not necessarily require religious beliefs or the acceptance of supernatural beings, but of a deep reflection on morality, ethics, and power of human decisions. Seeing angels and demons as symbols of internal forces and external influences that affect our life, we can begin to understand that the struggle between good and evil is more a matter of self-knowledge and self-transformation than a cosmic battle. Good, then, becomes the ability to recognize our shadows and choose to transcend them. Evil, in our inability to do so, or our denial of the responsibilities that human existence entails. Evil is not out of us, but within, to the extent that we allow our darkest desires, our indifference, our selfishness, and our lack of empathy to rule our life. Through this approach, angels and demons acquire a new relevance for the modern individual. The angels are not only transcendental figures, but representations of the internal light that we must cultivate to counteract the darkness that lurk in every corner of our mind. The demons, meanwhile, are not solo enemies of humanity, but manifestations of the forces that drag us towards the destructive, the dehumanizing, the selfish. And the key to fighting them does not reside in invoking powerful supernatural entities, but to learn to face our own limitations, to recognize our shadows and, finally, to choose what is better for ourselves and for others. This modern approach can also help us understand that morality is not a matter of black and white. Sometimes, good can have unwanted repercussions, and what seems bad can sometimes be necessary for growth and change. The lessons of good and evil, represented by angels and demons, show us that life is complex, and our decisions are never completely good or completely bad. It all depends on the context, on the intentions behind our actions and, above all, on our ability to learn from our experiences and the consequences of each choice. In the end, the proposal of a symbolic and modern approach of good and evil is not a definitive solution, but an invitation to reflect, to question, to seek balance. Instead of clinging to old rigid notions of the divine and the demonic, we can see them as integral parts of our own psyche, as symbols that teach us about our internal struggles and our higher aspirations. It is at this intersection of the divine and the human, the celestial and the earthly, where we can find the deepest responses about what it means to be human and how we can choose to live our lives with conscience and responsibility.